Hello everyone, welcome to another Deepest Law. We had a week off last week, but now we're back. And miniature disaster before we came on air. My lighter has run out of its butane. So I've had to run over to get my X-Scar premium butane. And I'm going to be adding more now to light up my Vegas Urbana cigar. Anyway, how are you doing, Simon?
Oh, I'm in agony this morning. I woke up with old man's back, which no amount of painkillers will touch. I'm on more drugs than Keith Richards right now, and it's still not touching it. But I'm sat upright. I've got a hot water bottle. I'm almost as warm as your composter, which is it at the desired 60 degrees this morning?
No. It went up to 30 yesterday, and it's back down. I didn't go in. I didn't dare open it, but the top is like at the top. There's a different. There's an internal thermometer, and then there's a one on top, and the one on top was saying 30 as I left last night. It was back down to 20 this morning. It was a cold morning. I'm gonna have to start getting into carbon nitrogen ratios and start calculating, because there's an optimum ratio. So, but I'm gonna have to think about everything I put in there and then work out what the current ratio is and then adjust it afterwards. I think I may have too much greens, too much nitrogen, and not enough browns. And there's a few things I haven't done that you're meant to do, like that you're meant to get this bulking agent, which is basically just chopped up old bits of wood, right? And shred paper. It's meant to be 2 parts, 1 part bulking agent, 1 part shredded paper, and then the 1/3 greens. I haven't been doing that. I've put in just a pile of garden waste, weeds. It's now got 8 cabbages, a whole bag of apples that I picked from an orchard on the weekend, which the missus was furious about. I was like, look, we can't eat all these apples. I bought these apples for the compost, and you've got your own bag. So, because I got apples coming out of my ears, I was like, look, unless you're going to make a crumble with it, that's going in the compost. She's like, oh, those poor apples, they died for nothing. I was like, no, they're going back to nature. So, I put a pint. So I'm adjusting it all the time. But the trouble is, Simon, it's not getting into the green zone. And I have to get it 60. And the highest I've got it so far is 45. And it didn't stick. It didn't stay there. So you
need to go back and review the comments on the previous Deepest Law. I mean, a lot of people, first of all, they were complaining that the YouTube's premier composting show was being interrupted by too much content about some Adam Curtis dude.
Which is fair. That's a fair comment.
Absolutely. And there were lots of very helpful, very involved people in the world of composting rushing to your aid. So,
well, I've opened the valve at the bottom for airflow. I've given it a good turn, but I have to wait now. I have to wait because the temperature goes down before it comes back up again, right? So it's quite frustrating. It's slow. You have to wait another couple of days. I will say that the volume keeps on going down, suggesting that some composting is going on, right? But I need to get that temperature over 60, Simon, to kill the weed seeds. Yeah. And now I've got a shitload of apples in there. I need to kill the apple seeds as well. So it's really important for my science to get it over 60.
What about putting yeast in? What about?
I was going to say some sort of exothermic microbe. Is that the word you would use?
So the next steps, if I can't do it, is literally microwaving stuff that you put in, right?
Beans, sausages and stuff.
Literally microwaving the greens, and then instead of putting nitrogen, like you can get pellets like chicken feed and things like that, which are full of nitrogen. That, and of course, using the proper bulking agent that they actually manufacture. I've been loath to do it because I've got all this dead wood in the, I've been using real dry leaves and things like that, but maybe I may have to resort to getting a shredder and things like that as well. So, but it's an uphill struggle, Simon. It really is.
Deepest law of the compost.
No, well, I mean, given that we've been talking about all this, and I've been shredding stuff. I shredded 4 cabbages and a whole pack of carrots in that shredder. Shall I play the ad?
In a sense, you've also shredded the prices of your courses.
Indeed, yeah, 25%. Yeah, exactly, Taurus. So let's play the promo, and then when we come back, we'll do some. There'll be more hot composting action. It's promo code Shredder. World-class education denied to you by school, denied to you by woke university. Well, no more. Pick up your course today. 25% off all courses with promo code Shredder. That's Shredder. Buy it now.
And is that a Chris Gard track or what?
No, that is a no. It's literally by a dark synth artist called Shredder. I think he's called Shredder 1984, and the track is called Mechanical Doppelganger.
I like it. It's good.
Perfect.
Yeah, so you'll be noticing there's no Dixon this week. He was just in for hypernormalization. Trouble is, Simon, he was starting to get too big for the club. I was in talks with him. He was like, "Look, I need my name above the. I need my name in the title. I need my face on every thumbnail."
Yeah.
Right. He was demanding to be.
Would it have been like The Deepest Law featuring Nick Dixon, or would it have been a new title, or what?
Yeah, like Nick Dixon's Deepest Law.
Right.
It was the demands were getting too. So I had to give him the hairdryer treatment, Simon. And I shifted him off to Real Madrid. That's why he's on the Lotus Eaters.
Well, what temperamental footballer is he again? Is he a Ronaldo, or is he what? Because
the analogy is the hairdryer treatment was famously Alex Ferguson.
Yeah,
gave David Beckham the hairdryer treatment, which is
he throw a shoe at him or something. Yeah,
and then he sold him to Real Madrid at the height of his fame, which is a very Alex Ferguson thing to do.
Wow.
So.
Yeah,
I am joking, of course. I'm making all of this up, but it's still fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
We had the little idea of him being like an absolute prima donna behind the scenes, didn't we?
Yeah, he's out there now, drinking Rioja out in Spain, thanking us for his transfer.
The thing is, your relations with Nick himself are fine, but you dealt with his agent, and his agent was the pushiest person you've ever met, right?
Yeah, his agent was, absolutely, And before you ask, yes, he was. Yeah, the agent was.
Yeah. It was Eric Hall, you mean? Yeah.
So before we get to can't get you out of my head, is there anything you guys want to promote or anything else you want to talk about? Indeed.
No. Well, I was interested in your comments yesterday on Office Hours about the sort of the ideological journey and, in fact, abandonment of ideology that we've all. Well, the sensible people have gone on.
Well, in a way now, on this panel, do we have, I'm centre left, of course, as everybody knows.
Oh, yeah.
Are you still in the sensible centre, Simon?
I'm, well, I mean, this is the difficulty with all this kind of left cultural theory that I keep bringing into things. And the more I find, I come across things that, to be honest, the left were talking about stuff that we were talking about 10, 15 years ago.
I know.
They were just coming at different point of view. They didn't come to a resolution. They're still depressed. I was with a bunch of leftists last week up in Middlesbrough watching a film. I sort of snuck in to sort of infiltrate their group and just, see what they were saying. And they were very depressed people. They were still kind of talking about, oh, can we get the trade unions to do anything? And you're thinking, oh, bless, they just haven't kept pace with what is happening in terms of raw power.
I don't know if it's just me, but like I was just saw Aaron Bastani and Morgoth having a little tete-a-tete on the last night. And I don't know if I speak for the whole of the right, but I would work with loads of the left on all sorts of things. I don't even resent their support for Antifa. Well, I do, but their support for violence and stuff. But excuse me. But they still, as much as ever, will not talk to us, except Aaron Bastani a little bit on Twitter. But we are sort of there as a potential alliance for them at any time against the.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, I was it was funny that exchange between Morgoth and Bastani was actually about. I mean, I should see if I can get it up. Hold on a minute, because it actually started getting me thinking. It started getting me kind of. I mean, one, it tapped into that. It was actually quite an unusually, dare I say, emotionally a manipulative tweet from Bastani, right? Because anybody who grew up in that era will know exactly what he's harping on about. But it is actually quite a difficult issue. I'll share the screen here, right? And obviously, the context for this is, this new Home Secretary is insisting that she is English or whatever, even Pakistani. So when a Braverman came out and said, "Look, I'll never be English. I'm a proud British Asian, but I'll never, or Asian British or whatever, but I'll never be English," and that's fine, right? Obviously, like Carl and Morgoth and lots of other people have been saying English is an ethnicity, and Bastani kind of like got into the mix, and like there's a picture of Paul Ince, there's a picture of Chris Eubank, and there's a picture of Frank Bruno. Happier times, without doubt. But it's like it's kind of impish of him to lob that in there, and he got quite a lot of pushback for it. It actually led me down a bit of a rabbit hole. I was like, where is Paul Ince from then? And he actually his family came from Trinidad and Tobago originally, but his dad, you might say, as is often the case from people of this sort of background, buggered off when he was 2. So he grew up.
No, that's made up. That's not true.
It's not. His dad buggered off when he was 2, and his mother went to work and live in Germany when he was 10. So he was left living with an aunt and a bunch of like cousins and things in East London from the age of 10. And he joined a gang and got involved in, they had a pretty rough upbringing, Paul. And then, of course, he went on to be a football star and played for England. He was the first black England captain. And it kind of like, it's really difficult then to look at a figure like Paul Ince and say, well, he's got that kind of Cockney accent. He was the England captain. Then you're going to turn around and say, well, you're not English, right? It's a difficult issue. But it always comes back to the question of mass and scale, right? When, in the 90s, when it was just 1 or 2 people, and it's just Jess Denzel from Only Fools and Horses, right? Or Craig Charles, or just 1 or 2 people, and there's a normal culture, which is like 95%, 99% white British, you can have these little add-ons. You can have these little kind of honorary, okay, well, you accept him in, he's one of the lads, whatever, right? And it's kind of like, it's polite. It's kind of, they've done their best to fit in and so on. And there it is. Okay. You can't scale that up. You can't suddenly then go from, but now, now half the room is Paul Ince. Now it's 60% of the room is Paul. It doesn't work. You can't just scale it up, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I do think that Bastani, in a however strange a way, is kind of pointing. He's also pointing to the problem, whether he realizes it or not.
Yeah, but they're left good at being quite good at being diagnostic of the problems. I mean, I the other day I chanced across Bastani interviewing my old chum Mark Fisher in 2011, and they were talking about the Notting Hill Carnival of that year, right, where they deployed something like 5,000 police and they'd arrested 274 people. 30 people had been hospitalized. And the mayoralty had issued Section 60 search warrants across the city. And Bastani was saying, but this is incredible because the press was still calling it a peaceful event, right? And Bastani is saying here, he says to Mark Fisher, does that express this idea that they have of capitalist realism, this idea that you can't imagine anything being any different? And he says to him, is this why the system has to persist with this myth of nothing's happening, So they're literally at the nothing ever happened stuff back in 2011. And Fisher says, interesting, I wrote this down, what he says, I think we can measure the tenor of the times by the amount of effort that is now being required in order to make it look as if nothing is happening. Whereas before, in 2007, 2008, as it were, nothing was happening of its own accord. Now the amount of straining of sinews that is required by the ruling class to maintain the image of stasis is itself evidence that things are really changing. I think we're now into a kind of bad authoritarian spiral where exactly those measures, if they're not likely to lead to long-term containment, in fact, they're likely to lead to exactly the problems which gave birth to them in the first place. And that's what happens with authoritarianism. So they were already in this sense of nothing ever happens, 15 years ago. Interesting,
isn't it? Any thoughts on this Paul Ince gate, I guess you'd call it? I mean, I don't know, I think a lot of people made sensible points, but ultimately it comes down to what I've always said. A street can take one guy or two people. It cannot take a whole tribe. It cannot take a whole street. It cannot take a whole town. You know what I mean?
Well, go on.
There's no way anyone can fail to have noticed that. I mean, Bastani is similar age to us, right? Slightly younger, maybe, but he would have experienced that there was just a general more innocence about racial matters. Most people just did not mention race, for better or worse, right? He would have experienced that back in the 90s. And what has made the difference is obviously the palpable change in how we're ruled and the immense numbers difference. Everyone's experienced that. And
let's not forget a decade of the television telling you you're evil for being white. It's not. We can't get over. Can't get over that. There's been and the thing is, I don't think Paul Ince went in for this, but I remember members of that team that he was part of, or a little bit generation before, came out and in the era of woke started attacking. Do you remember John Barnes? Right?
Sol Campbell.
I mean, I liked John Barnes when I was growing up, but I'll never forget that in that moment he came out and attacked the country. He attacked the population I mean, obviously, it's not difficult to believe that in the 80s somebody may have been racist to John Barnes. It probably did happen, right? I wouldn't be surprised if he had bananas thrown at him and stuff like that, right? But the fact is that he still, was made a very rich and successful man in this country and a household name, and he played for England and all the rest of it. And it's like, I don't know. I always go back to a bit in John Bagot Glubb, in that book, The Fate of Empires, and he says, look, when things are going well, all of these other groups will come in and they'll have their piece of the pie and they'll be happy to go along with it. But the second things start going downhill and the fishers come in, they'll turn on you and they'll hold on to those old hatreds and so on. Yes. And that thing from John Barnes always reminded me of that bit from Glubb there, at the end of Empire, which is what we're going to be talking about, actually.
It totally keys into this documentary. I'll do a little bit of a preamble, if I may, about where Curtis is coming from. But I hated this documentary when it came out. I thought Curtis had lost it. I thought, he's having a go at us for being racist now. And I hadn't watched it for 5 years or 4 years since it came out. And then reviewing it now and going back and looking at the sort of influences, there is something more going on. It's on the one hand tempting because Curtis is a kind of liberal lefty to think he is sort of doing a j'accuse of Britain as a racist country. I think he is standing off from the problem actually now, and he's trying to describe a dynamic that is exactly what you're talking about from the point of view of Glubb there, and this chap David Graeber, who he's taking influence from in this documentary, has a theory about this. I mean, shall I go into that and just sort of explain?
Yeah, let's get the proper Simon intro here.
So, well, he's this documentary begins with a dedication and a quote from David Graeber. He was an American and he lived in Britain, anthropologist. He was a sort of left-wing anarchist and a sort of political activist. And he did a few interesting books. He had a breakthrough book about debt back in 2011, and then two other books which were interesting. One of them kind of leans into the sort of hypernormalization era, fake reality. It's a book called Bullshit Jobs, and it was essentially talking about all the kind of meaningless jobs that exist now, to make people feel that work is actually actually has a point and has some kind of worth, and he's very good on sort of giving categories to the sorts of pointless jobs we have now. He has these.
I thought, Simon, I actually had a photo that encapsulates this.
Yeah.
From the digital ID thing came in recently.
Oh yeah.
The team actually in charge of implementing digital ID. Have you seen them?
Go on.
There they are. Right.
Wow.
And when I look at that picture and you're talking about made up or pointless jobs,
I wonder which of his Graeber's categories they would fit. He has 5 categories: flunkies, goons, duct tapers, box tickers, and taskmasters. Flunkies are people whose jobs are there to make their superiors feel important, like receptionists and admin assistants. Goons are there to basically harm or deceive people on behalf of their employer. Like lawyers, telemarketing people, lobbyists. Duct tapers, he says, are people who temporarily fix problems that could be fixed permanently. You've got coders repairing shoddy code. I'm not going to say who. Or airline desk staff who sort of fob you off when you lose your luggage. Box tickers, and they create the appearance that something useful is being done when it isn't. And then there's taskmasters, and that's the managerial class who just create extra work for people who don't need it. So that's the kind of interesting sort of pop anthropology that he does. But the really interesting book he does that Curtis has picked up on in 2015 is called The Utopia of Rules. And what Graeber is talking about here, essentially what underpins this documentary is violence. He's talking about what he refers to as structural violence. And now you hear the word structural and you think, oh, here we go. It's the left with their structural racism and so and so. But it's kind of not that. To sort of grossly simplify it, the violence he's talking about, it's not per se the actuality of violent acts, although those have existed. What he means is that the modern state is constructed with the ultimate threat of violence. We all know this, that the monopoly of force. And what you can end up with is a society where the understanding people have of how they negotiate life and move in society becomes what he calls interpretive labor. And that is to say that you're aware that the state wields the threat of violence. So you work out how to negotiate society, which becomes bureaucratized. It becomes a sort of game. And in order to get through life, you have to work out how to negotiate that with a minimum suffering and hassle. And the underpinning idea of a heroic society like empire was definitely a society underpinned by violence. So it was a clear motive force in history. And what happens is that as, if you like, it's broken down and barbarism moves closer to you, the resilience of your society is impaired, and what he calls its imaginative capacity to function becomes deranged. So you see that empire itself is the idea of the kind of Faustian spirit going out and dominating, conquering, and so on. And at home, what the society does is it culturally bolsters this with the celebrations of heroic narrative, warriors, explorers, what the Vitalist bros will call the thumos being played out. Yeah. And the way the society manages at home as well, along with telling itself heroic narratives, is its bureaucratization. Now, he's not just talking about government departments, but the whole of society is made into a bureaucratic exercise. So as I say, you negotiate life in this managed form, and we talk about managerialism, which avoids the emergence of that violence, that structural violence, which he says is kind of necessary. It's there in all societies. And life is this series of engagements with these organizing forces of improving societal patterns and transactions. And the thing that happens in Britain is that the British people adapt to a perverse extent to the appeals of the bureaucratic leadership, to adapt to what is reasonable and sensible, because these are the kind of USPs of managerialism. So the British temperamentally make the best of this adapting to this idea of the structural violence and adopting the bureaucratization of society. And he's quite interesting because he talks about all sorts of cultural phenomena that come in to help manage the problem of structural violence, because although it's not there in most people's lives, it kind of looms as, you know, the big stick carried quietly in the background. And people find comfort, for instance, in things like, you know, as I say, heroic narratives. He talks particularly about Tolkien, in fact, and C.S. Lewis. And he says that, quote, "These books are not just appealing because they create endless daydream material for the inhabitants of bureaucratic societies. Above all, they appeal because they continue to provide a systematic negation of everything bureaucracy stands for. Just as medieval clerics and magicians like to fantasize about a radiant celestial administrative system, so do we now fantasize about the adventures of medieval clerics and mages, existing in a world in which every aspect of bureaucratic existence has been carefully stripped away. Why do we do so? Well, the simplest explanation is that we're dealing with a form of ideological inoculation. Historically, one of the most effective ways for a system of authority to tout its virtues is not to speak of them directly, but to create a particularly vivid image of their absolute negation, of what it claimed life would be like in the total absence of, say, patriarchal authority or capitalism or the state. As an ideological ploy, the trick works best when the image is on some level profoundly appealing, so as you see in the sort of the Tolkien stories. And this eventually gets to a point where it becomes kind of hollowed out, this appeal to the heroic myth. And what happens is, you know, he quotes quite a funny example, for instance, where he has a friend who is an academic. And this academic gives a little anecdote about his kind of modern form of resistance to the fact that the bureaucratic society is impinging on him. And this academic talks about sitting in his office, and he says, "The point when I decided I just didn't care about that academic job anymore was when I stopped turning off the sound on my computer games during office hours. There'd be some student waiting outside for feedback on his assignment, and I was like, wait, just let me finish killing this dwarf and I'll get back to you." That literally is the kind of, you know, the abandonment of the sense of propriety that comes in. So Graeber's idea is when the empire stops, when that sort of powerful, violent, if you like, side of the dialectic is emptied out, and you see this in you know, the footage that Curtis uses. He has some shots of empty Piccadilly, you know, the iconic centre of the life of Britain, and all the energy's just drained away. It's just dead. He says once that structural violence, in a sense, stops having purchase by the fact of empire stopping, the society distorts its kind of previously held forms of social agreeableness. And the regime perceives the threat, and it continues to double down on the bureaucratic mode of living, and that makes the tension worse. So the heroic myths get cycled out because they're naturally in conflict with, you know, managerial objectives of harmonizing social relations.
This sounds very similar to best-selling book Prophets of Doom by me.
Exactly.
I mean, it's literally what I talk about in that over and over again. So very interesting.
And what you get is it gets these kind of old myths get replaced with these new synthetic mythic narratives, like equality, like xenophilia, like focusing on minority individualist interests. And so the type of structural violence that Graeber says is always part of society's control mechanism has changed. And that's what I thought was interesting. You picked up on Carl's rant yesterday about Keir Starmer and the way he was kind of rejecting what Starmer's, you know, because Starmer is you know, again, he's furiously doubling down. And it becomes relevant here because Carl's noticing this point that Graeber's making. The people have bent over backwards to accommodate the bureaucratic mode of living, and they've internalized many of the demands of political correctness or woke or whatever you want to call it. But now the regime is making its own demands, and it's way in excess of what has already been negotiated away by the population. And so the regime's demand for tolerance and compassion and economic support for its client groups, it's overwhelming what is the perceived value for people of what they've put in, this interpretive labor, this act of accommodating themselves to the bureaucratic system. The people are saying, you know, come on, we've given you everything you've asked for in terms of adapting ourselves, and now you're literally punishing us at the core of our identity. Having done so, up with this, we will not put. And so that's the sort of underpinning structure of what Graeber's is talking about, and where Curtis is going with this thing of the racism that he's talking about is more that it's symptomatic of this this structure breaking down within the British the British people, the British nation, the idea of the society, and this diminishing of the heroic narrative when it encounters, quotes, barbarism. That's Graeber's word, and the passivity that it inculcates as people adjust to rules in games. The world becomes a game in which you play rules. It's not the spirit of creative achievement, going out into the external world and forging empires and being developing engineering and systems of commerce and trade. It's just you're reduced to playing rules in games, and this is the idea of the utopia of rules. And this is what begins to fall apart in this period that Curtis is beginning to chart. And the reaction is that the quotes racism is part of this breaking down of this mismatch between the fact that the heroic energy is being displaced, and now you have a society that is it's turning against its own agreeableness. So
very, very interesting. I mean, it's funny you mentioned the myths and so on. I happened to watch the first 20 minutes of Robin Hood, the Disney one with a little one yesterday or the day before. I think it was 2 days ago. And when I was watching it, you forget just how nasty the fucking sheriff of Nottingham is, right? He's like, there's a kid that gets like a little farthing, like a penny, and he comes in and he taxes it. Or there's like a blind beggar man. It's actually Robin Hood in disguise, and he takes like all of the money. There's a blacksmith, and he just taxes it all. And I couldn't help watching it thinking like, yeah, this is just Keir Starmer. Like, this is just, it feels like, I mean, we're what I'm saying is our government now is as against the people as something in a, like it feels like a kind of a fairy tale or a folk villain, if you want to put it that way. And there's lots of that in this documentary. I mean, this is quite a sprawling documentary. There's lots of small figures who come up and drop out of the narrative. And one of he comes across Daniel Kahneman at one point, which might interest you, and we'll sort of look at that stuff. But one of the figures he talks about is a Russian radical called Eduard Limonov, and that'll come in later episodes. But he talks about Limonov, and he makes an interesting point. He says Limonov was not a very nice man. This is Adam Curtis. But he did make an interesting point, which was that until the left either uses nationalism or creates a new mythology that's even more powerful, they won't get enough people on their side. Yeah, and now we're watching Keir Starmer pathetically waving flags, and I mean they're failing dismally, aren't they? Dismally. Yeah. Whenever a leftist says I'm patriotic, it always rings hollow, doesn't it? You never believe them. You never believe them when they say that they're patriotic. It's a ruse. How do we know? Because they spent the past decade telling us that they hate this country and hate everything about it. So
I'd say there is one exception to that, and that's the very respectable Mike Tapp, who I do find very convincing when he talks about what it means to be British and stuff. Who could disagree with Mike Tapp?
Are you being sarcastic, Horace?
I am. Sorry, that's too dry, wasn't it? Sorry.
I was like, that doesn't sound like you.
Apologies.
All right. So let's make a start then. This is one of the ones, Simon, that I've never seen. So I'm kind of excited.
I'm just going to say to Horace though, I mean, because I heard some murmurings from you before the stream. I mean, as I said, when I watched this, I took against it immediately because I thought Curtis just boldly asserting we're a racist society. This is the problem, and that was it. And as I say, I'm revisiting it now with a slightly different view. But did you have a view on it?
Well, I'm glad you've said this because when it was first on, I only watched 2 episodes of it, I think, and there's 5 or 6 on there. Or 7. And I'm glad if you say that it's going to be there's sort of something worth watching for. Because it seemed horrible. It seemed like not only suddenly he's just become a very conventional anti-racist leftist, but also like really provocative and goading about it. Like some of the images he uses in this do seem to be goading, but as I say, I gave up on it after only 1 or 2 episodes. I also had the difficult thing. It's not really Curtis's fault, but just I'd recommended this to people in advance of it being on TV because his previous things have been so good, and they watched it and they were like, "Why the fuck have you recommended this to me? You know, this is horrible." But there is a pot at the end of the rainbow, I hope.
I have how can I say this? Before even, I mean, I don't know what's in this documentary, right? Other than what you guys are talking about now. But you know, I kind of do think Britain was racist. I mean, British Empire was racist. And
including Churchill, the hero, you know.
I mean,
this
is where I've often said the left are more correct than the centre right. Yeah, right. Is that we shouldn't be doing this like cope thing of being like, the country was racist for God's sake. Yeah, right. And,
So that relates back.
A lot of people. You know, in these sort of circles would say is that like, but that's natural and normal. This is just what human beings are like, you know.
In group, out group,
They have in group preference, and this is like perfectly all right. What I don't like is the kind of centre right myth making. Oh yeah, well, actually, it's always been like a tolerant country, and the entire empire was done in the name of like universal values or whatever, because it wasn't.
Yeah.
Sorry, Horace, go on. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's so noisy here. I was trying to mute just because of the cars going past. Just something Simon said a minute ago reminded me of basically what you're saying there, AA, which is that really the problem we have is the centre-right cope. And this is something I see people doing now. I really thought they would. I mean, people are probably getting through this, but there's still a contingent of people who are going to carry on doing it for some years. And that's, I'm not racist, we're not racist, like we're this, we're that. Like we've got every other reason to object to illegals other than race, you know, and people just trying to make everything about public services or like it's not racist to be against illegal immigration stuff. That I think is the same thing. It's like the real rightist or patriotic position is you don't get to accuse me of that. You're just telling me I am what I am, you know. If you call me racist, like you're just referring to human nature, right? The people who are the actual problem, like that, and that's just, you know, both sides are sort of being honest, but the actual problem is the people who try to say, yes, racism is bad, no, we're not that.
Exactly, and this is what I've been trying to say for years. Though.
And it's like a self-containment thing, you know. It's like the centre-right policing itself.
But this is what I've been trying to say for years, though, right? This is why I'd always read a Marxist history over the centre-right history, because the Marxists will actually tell you what happened, right? Only where they say, and that was terrible, you just inverse it and say, oh yeah, that was pretty. I can understand why they did that, you know, or whatever. And so the guy in the chat saying, oh, you know, this is AA versus a straw man. It's not a straw man, because these people are out there. These people are still there now, even right now. The whole thing about Farage being called racist, you know, everybody's coming out and saying Farage is not racist. It's still a debate now. Or the stuff on Churchill, you know, all these centre-right, oh, actually, Churchill, you know, he's a complicated man, blah, 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 but he was not the... I mean, of course he was bloody racist. He was a bloke who was born in 1890 or something, you know?
Yeah. He named the racial hierarchy, you know. He had, like, Jews at the top, English-speaking people second, and, it was like... There was a hierarchy.
So I think you've got to bear this, keep this tension in mind, viewers, just when, you know, there's this element of... Yes, we know Curtis is a left liberal, and he's kind of pro-green agenda, and he would say he you know, he doesn't like racism. He wouldn't say he doesn't like racists. He said he wouldn't like racism. He'd find it uncomfortable. You know, he wants people to be treated in a sort of reasonable, liberal-minded way. But I think to associate the documentary with his viewpoint, I think is dangerous. I think he is trying to stand off and say that what emerged as the racist response in the 50s and 60s was something connected to and diagnostic for this deeper malaise, which was about this country kind of being fractured at its very core, being separated from its kind of own heroic narrative. There's a couple of interesting things I want to add about Curtis. There's a bit of footage in there of some skinheads smashing up a bar. And I found an interview. He said, I wanted to put in skinheads, you see. I've always thought that skinheads got a bad rap. I used to be a skinhead when I was young because I loved reggae and ragga music.
What?
Skinheads are ambiguous characters, and I'm attracted to ambiguous characters. So, I mean, this is, I guess, the 60s idea.
That is true, by the way. That is totally true. Yeah.
60s idea of the skinheads, where it was kind of two-tone and you know, sort of racially open, let's say.
This is England 86 or something like that.
Yeah. So there was a little bit of interesting Curtis law there. And there was I actually looked at a criticism of Curtis, some American guy. He'd written an article called The Paranoid Style of Adam Curtis. And there was one particularly telling quote there, because this guy really had it in for Adam Curtis, and he came in on the kind of angle of sweeping generalizations, all this kind of stuff. And he says, there's this kind of left figure, and he's referring to Adam Curtis, but sometimes not really on the left, who tends to think of power entirely in terms of organizations and figures at the top and elites. And he quotes a UC Berkeley lecturer called Jasper Burns, who said, I think of Julian Assange as a kind of figure like that, or maybe Glenn Greenwald. There's a left media sphere which really doesn't see anything happening except these powerful people making decisions and producing discourse, which is really not the way societies and economies work.
Interesting.
Curtis thinks top down, but
and I think Glenn Greenwald, more than most people, probably has been vindicated on a lot of stuff he's been saying for years in the past couple of years. I mean, the thing is, I mean, just before we start it here, there is a kind of, I mean, even within online right discourse, right, people do make the distinction between the kind of like, they call it low IQ, right? There's a low IQ bigotry or a low IQ anti-Semitism or whatever. And people kind of understand what is meant by that as well. So I do. I mean, I do have question marks over, like, when we talk about racism, there's a difference between understanding aggregate statistics, right, or understanding, that if a certain demographic is going to take over a town, that's probably going to affect the crime rate and things like this. Or I don't know, so you can understand that information and then come to a set of conclusions about group characteristics, something like this. Okay, but there is a kind of different type of, I guess, where it's just like, oh well, I just I don't like that person just because they're that sort of from that sort of background, and of course, almost everybody knows people who, you may agree with them on absolutely everything, but they've got they've got that one thing that's different or whatever. And I've always struggled to just completely write a person off just based on one or two things like that, right? I mean, I think of the friends that we've had, across the years and things, or I mean, the banner case, Horace, is Thomas Sowell, right? Thomas Sowell, right, is the absolute banner example. It's like, well, he wouldn't really mind Thomas Sowell as a neighbor or something like that. And it's like there is a difference between completely writing someone off just because they're black or whatever, and these more kind of general group level observations. Would you agree with that? Or
I would add to that. Like in my life, I've just met, around my way, this like mostly white British people, but there's always been a few blacks around here, and the blacks I knew just they talked with round here accent rather than the MLE accent, the London Jamaican sounding, whatever it is, and they were into the same scenes and the same interests and sports and stuff, and it was like just the problem didn't arise, the question of race just didn't really arise, I know that's a very cliched thing to say, but it's just we got along because we weren't under threat. We weren't. Yeah.
So there is. I mean, there's some sort of distinction that people kind of make between these two different types of racism, or type. Like there's one is just recognizing reality, and there's another. And I've never been too keen on this second sort because I think it's open to a lot of manipulation
Easy
and a lot of
manipulation.
pseudoscience. Like, I mean, the most obvious one in recent times has been the attempts to say, oh, well, if you've got a problem with what Israel's doing, that's brown, right? I mean, this is appealing to some sort of racism, right? Some sort of low IQ bigotry, but it's not founded on anything at all. It's just a kind of, it's not even science. It's not science. It's just a kind of vibe that's thrown out there as an attempt to manipulate the discourse. And I've always been wary of these sorts of things because they're just so open to abuse, basically. Yeah. So anyway, with all those caveats out of the way, let us make a start.
We are living through strange days across Britain, Europe, and America.
Sorry to pause it immediately. Simon, the name of the book, the David Graeber book that you were quoting from.
The Utopia of Rules. I'll put a link to the PDF of it afterwards.
And I just wanted to, I mean, this is a really trivial comment, but has Adam Curtis's voice dropped a couple of octaves?
It does sound a bit deeper, doesn't it?
He's deeper and older. He's obviously an older gent now, isn't he? So
yes, he's 70, I think, this year.
And where's this from? Like 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
This is from 2021.
Yeah,
I think David Graeber was an occasional guest on Novara Media, so again, you could get Aaron Bastani on to talk about this. Maybe I'll drop out if you need.
Yeah.
Societies have become split and polarized, not just in politics, but across the whole culture. There is anger at the inequality and the ever-growing corruption, and a widespread distrust of the elites.
Is this why Curtis has stopped narrating? Why he did the whole Russian thing without narration? I think he's like, hate the sound of my new voice. Can't
I think he began to feel that the footage itself was strong enough to tell the story, and perhaps he was trying to sort of ring the changes on his style. But he's since sort of said, I need to go back to doing the narrations, really, because it's just kind of the way it works for him, the way it works best.
Yet at the same time, there is a paralysis, a sense that no one knows how to escape from this. Even in America, where there is now hope with the new president, there are also fears that despite the growing crisis, the system will just return to normal. This paralysis is also fueled by a technology driven by the aim of giving you today another version of what you had yesterday, and never a different tomorrow.
Pause a second. I've got to object to the line, there was hope with the new president. Like, fuck off. Biden. Like, are you kidding me? Biden was a joke. But do you remember that? I don't know if anyone remembers, but like the process by which Biden became the candidate was literally, they just ran through every other at all plausible person, and all of them got just like 1%. It was fucking like Kamala Harris, obviously, couldn't get 1%. Amy Klobuchar and all this, like all these nobodies. So it's like, well, it's got to be Biden then. Like, there's just no one else. He's old. Like, people know his name, so yeah, it's got to be him. He's a fucking joke, let alone how badly he went on to rule. Anyway, I just want to say that.
These films are a history of how we got to this place, and why both those in power and we find it so difficult to move on. They will trace different forces across the world that have led to now, not just in the West, but in China and Russia as well. And they are told in a different way. They are an emotional history of what went on inside the heads of all kinds of people. Because in the age of the individual...
Sorry to pause it again. All I can think of, this needs to be an 80s synth track. this video that this just needs to have an 80s because it needs to be on my Madonna playlist. This, how can it not be? Come on, it needs to have Small Town Boy in the back of it or something.
What you felt and what you wanted and what you dreamed of were going to become the driving force across the world. And to understand the present, you have to go back and see what happened when those hopes and dreams and uncertainties inside people's minds met the much older forces of power.
Pause.
Often power that was decaying.
Sorry, I shouldn't have paused while he's still talking about power. I thought he'd finish that sentence. But so he's probably saying something really important. But just wanted to ask, what was that robot just then? Simon, do you know?
Oh, that's the Odex 1 robot by Odetics. It was a sort of kind of spider-legged robot that was created in the early 80s. I'll post some footage of it later on. But again, it was following on slightly from the kind of AI themes that were in hypernormalization. That was all that was.
That's brilliant that you know. I didn't know you'd know what that was. Anyone who's played the Fallout games, that looked like a Mr. Handy robot. Fallout, the Fallout sort of basic premise is the world departed a bit technologically in the 50s. So for some reason, loads of things even into the future look like the 50s, and the 50s aesthetic carries on into the it's good. Anyway,
I was also wondering if AA recognizes this. This music video shot.
I know this one. This is famous.
Does AA know?
Is it?
He must do.
Is it Puff Daddy?
No.
It's Tupac.
Tupac and his crew. It's Tupac's diss track against Biggie and Puffy.
Hit him up.
I was in the right ballpark, but wrong coast. Wrong coast.
It's coarse. It's insulting. It's in bad taste, but it was a big hit.
Yeah.
I was always East Coast, see.
I
was.
I agree.
And you were West Side. See, we would have had beef. We would have had beef in the 90s, or us. Me and my crew against you and your crew.
I wouldn't do the diss track. If you diss track to me, then maybe you'd get one back. But I was more about the music. I wasn't about the beefs, if I could avoid it. I just like the West Coast sound, that I like the idea of cruising along Sunset Boulevard or whatever.
Was it G-Funk? G-Funk.
G-Funk, there we go. Yeah.
G-Funk,
this is the G-Funk era. Yeah.
Right. I was all about the
Nate
East Coast
Dogg,
boom bap,
Regulate.
Boom bap for me. All right, let's carry on. I always remember the notorious B.I.G. line, right? He says something like, if I had to choose a coast, I'd have to pick the East. I live out there, so don't go there. But sometimes I've been to the West. I've seen some nice breasts in the West. That's what he says. So
stroked. He says stroked a little breast in the West.
Yeah.
That's on his track about California. Most of his tracks are about being from the East Coast and New York and that. But he makes sure to give props to California because it's such a great place.
And then they killed him.
And desperate to keep its ascendancy.
Talking about lyrical genius, I always appreciated the song where he says, B.I.G. says, I've got the cleanest, meanest penis. You never seen this stroke of genius. See, it has its own poetry, doesn't it?
Yeah.
These strange days did not just happen. We, and those in power, created them together.
Is this the sort of skinhead music that Curtis was listening to as a youth?
Do Nothing by the Specials. This is a bit of a dig at the BBC. He was talking in about 2018 about how the sort of meetings in the news department of the BBC, they were dealing with, I'm I'm trying, like things like the Nice terrorist attack and the sort of coup in Turkey. And he said the people were saying, we just don't know what line to put on this. We don't know how to tell the story anymore. And Curtis often comes in with these criticisms of journalists have given up trying to explain the world, especially at the BBC. So it does make him a little bit unpopular with his colleagues at the BBC. So he's showing these guys, these are journalists running away from the Capitol building on January the 6th.
Oh.
Oh, what's happening here? Did we get just a bit of a glitch?
Just pause. Like,
Go on, Horst.
why are they running away? Shouldn't they be trying to film it and stuff?
They were just being evacuated. I think Nancy Pelosi had come out just before this. There was a sort of hysteria for people legging it, and I think Curtis is making the point about the journalists are literally running away from the news.
The Specials is the band of Jerry Dammers, right?
Mm.
I watched a video. I think it is Wyvern the Terrible, who really hates AA, by the way. I'm sorry, but he done a video about Jerry Dammers and his elite connect. There's a lot of these groups that seem to have like a political message, as the Specials did, right? There was sort of racial unity sort of people, unite the kingdom, you could say. Mm. And Jerry Dammers was like, I don't know, he's the son of some general or something. I don't know. It was interesting. It was curious linkages.
You know what's a wild coincidence?
That you posted Ghost Town this morning.
Today's banger that's better than Madonna is Ghost Town by the Specials.
What
are the odds? What are the odds of that? Eh?
Yeah.
Let's carry on.
Old Terry Hall.
Is the footage meant to be like this, Simon?
Say again?
Is the footage meant to be like this?
Yeah.
In the late 1950s, as the British Empire was falling apart, there was a growing sense that something was badly wrong under the surface. There was a feeling of unease that despite all the reforms after the Second World War and the welfare state, the old forms of power had not gone away. And neither had the violence and the corruption that had always been a part of that power.
Pause, please. Not going to go on about power and his use of it, but just how did they manage to film Piccadilly so empty? Is that like 4 a.m. or something?
Don't know. Just BBC Archive.
You can't. I don't think like if you're making a movie, you can't just like pay to have Piccadilly empty, can you? Like that is so.
Maybe it was just quiet in the 50s. No one there.
It could just be, like you say, early on a Sunday morning, like when they did 28 Days Later, and they just got up very early on a Sunday in the summer and filmed London when it was empty.
Oh, okay.
Which is the best time, really.
I have to mention I was down Piccadilly on Monday, and Angus Steakhouse is gone. And I walk past that Angus Steakhouse every day when I was working down, because I used to work down there, and I always I never went there, but I was always so curious about the old 60s carpets, filthy, and then like just the dated decor and stuff. And I took a picture of it. Let me show you. I took a picture of it of Angus Steakhouse.
There's Garfunkel Steakhouse around there.
That's the Angus Steakhouse now.
Mm.
And I came across one of the funniest reviews I've ever read, which described it as sad steaks seasoned with despair. David Ellis sinks his teeth into a restaurant that feels unpatriotic in its crapness, right? And I was like, I wonder why, after so many years of being there, why is it not there anymore? And basically what had happened, last November, October sort of time, they had paid a bunch of influencers to go on Reddit, right, and say, oh, there's this hidden gem in London, Angus Steakhouse. The hidden gem, yeah. It's one of London's best kept secrets type thing, and it created a bit of a kind of like viral or quasi-viral thing where people actually, like, not just tourists but Londoners actually started going to Angus Steakhouse, and that reviewer reviewed it as part of this, like, you know, because there was a buzz on Reddit, gave it a 1-star review. And then the scandal came out that they'd been so scummy that they were basically tricking people to go there by like paying for like fake buzz. So that's what's happened to Angus Steakhouse.
It's a moment of Zoom and nostalgia. They'll be doing like steak wave music and stuff.
Was it all like Tim Pool and Lauren Chen taking the money? And,
Took the money from Big Steak, from Big Angus.
They were getting it from Big Steak. Laura Loomer was blaming it all on Qatar and Mark Levin and stuff.
Couldn't believe. Imagine how stupid you got to be to fall for that, though.
Everybody's walked past. Everybody who's been to the West End has walked past that steakhouse. And
I've never been in it, but I imagine it's the sort of place that has those crappy 70s light fittings, like sort of alloy with pretend plastic candles on them, sure. That kind of thing.
So anyway, let's carry on. I have a theory, by the way, that Angus Steakhouse is responsible for at least 50% of this country's reputation for bad food, because tourists go to London, end up in Angus Steakhouse, have a really depressing steak, and the food shit in Britain.
There was more than one as well. They were in all the hotspots. I think there was one in like Covent Garden, like all the places with the biggest footfall, right? And there was Garfunkel's Steakhouse. That was like the rival.
That was fucking shit as well. Yeah. All of them are bad. The Planet Hollywood as well. Crap. All of them.
It was the upmarket wimpy.
What's the other one? Hard Rock Cafe. All shit. Really bad. But anyway, let's carry on.
Hooters.
I went to a Hooters once in Atlanta, Georgia. All of my colleagues, I was there for a Shakespeare conference, and all of my colleagues were like, "Oh, we're going to this vegan restaurant." I was like, "Oh, fuck off." So they all went to this vegan restaurant, and I was like, "Yeah, fuck this." And I went into Hooters, and there was a college basketball game on, and the Hooters was absolutely ram-packed full of basketball Americans. So I was the only non-basketballer in there, if you want to put it that way. Felt like I was at that Wu-Tang gig again, Simon. But to be fair, they were pretty nice to me. A couple of people came up. I was like, "Hey, how you doing, bud?" and all this sort of stuff. I was in a tweed jacket eating some vat of absolute slop or whatever, nachos or it was fun. I got to learn a bit about basketball, cultural experience. Anyway, let's carry on.
Opens with the traditional reading of.
Tell you what I had: beer pretzels. You ever had those?
No.
It's not bad.
It's very American.
Not bad.
Names and the wide experience available to the bank is apparent.
Mr. Cobbold, Mr. Miners, Sir Charles Hambro.
Senior Director, Merchant.
The bankers in the City of London had been at the very heart of the empire. In 1958, two of the most powerful of them, Lord Kindersley and William Keswick, were accused of using insider information to make millions for themselves.
Lord Kindersley.
Chairman of Rolls-Royce, merchant banker.
Mr. Keswick.
Hudson's Bay Company, a Far Eastern merchant.
The evidence against them was very strong.
That's a job I'd love you to do, Simon.
What's that?
The guy whispering underneath. Mr. Kesman, merchant banker.
That's kind of easy voiceover work. I could,
great voiceover work.
Yeah, this was an insider trading scandal in 1957. Those guys basically, there was discussion of the change in the bank rate, and they used it to sell £2.5 million worth of gilts in the couple of days before the rate rise was officially announced. That £2.5 million is worth about £77 million today. So they cleaned up, and there was an inquiry, but nothing changed.
Interesting.
This was before decimalisation as well, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other thing where you need a commentator to murmur between bits of the normal audio is on election nights, isn't it? Whilst the Raven Party,
Yeah,
Conservatives, you could be that as well.
Yeah, you
exactly.
could do that. You could do the football scores, of course, right? And snooker, maybe.
Leighton Orient 2.
Yeah.
Hull Academicals or whoever, 0.
Yeah,
That's an impossible game, but yeah.
In snooker, there wasn't just the commentator. There was the guy who'd be like, brown ball, it's the blue ball. And they used to do that for black and white TVs. So, yeah. Helpful for me because I was colourblind. I am colourblind.
Yeah,
so.
That's true.
But when Keswick was shown the evidence, he dismissed it with a phrase that became notorious. It is difficult, he said, to remember conversations one has while shooting on a grouse moor. A government inquiry said the two men were obviously innocent.
I wonder if any part of this is in the background of one of my favourite films, which is ostensibly about trade unions and things like that. There's a film called I'm All Right, Jack from 1959. But every single person in that film, capitalist, union boss, is corrupt as hell. And it's all about, I'm all right, Jack. At least I'm making out all right. But it's basically a film about like the breakdown of trust in the kind of British elite and the British establishment and British society in general. Brilliant film, but it's came out about 2 years after this, 1959. So I wonder if it's in all of this is in the background of that movie. Malcolm Muggeridge is in that film.
Is it like the British version of On the Waterfront? It sounds like it.
No, it's a Bolton Brothers comedy starring Ian Carmichael and Terry Thomas. But it's a brilliant. It's one of the, and it's got Peter Sellers in it.
Yeah,
you'd love it, Horace, because it's all about how like shit unions are. And Peter Sellers plays this kind of local like foreman who's in the union, but he's really into like Marxism and stuff. So he's like a proper like a little kind of petty intellectual type thing. Brilliant performance from Sellers. It's a great film. It's one of my favorite films.
it probably does tie in to some extent. There was that film, The League of Gentlemen, from 1960, which Curtis used footage of in one of the previous documentaries, and that's a fun little film actually, which is about a bunch of ex-military men sort of trying to resettle into civilian society, late 50s, early 60s, and they feel they've been kind of, let down by, the government, the powers that be, and sort of stiffed, if you like lots of military people are once they leave, and they're sort of all kind of, they get together and decide to rob a bank and take some back. So I think there's a sense of people kind of, the system's not quite, paying me back the way I think it should.
Also, another tie back to Robin Hood, the Disney one. I wasn't aware that Sir Hiss in Robin Hood is played by Terry Thomas.
Well, of course.
And the Prince John is Peter Ustinov. So I wasn't aware of that until it came up in the credits. So that's an interesting tie-in. But that was around the same time, I think. There's obviously something in the air around that sort of time. So anyway.
At the same time, reports had started to come back from one of the last parts of the empire, Kenya, that seemed to show that those in charge had gone out of control.
Well, when I first watched I'm All Right, Jack, I started getting addicted to saying Terry Thomas catchphrases. Because he'd be like, oh, absolute shark. Oh, stinker. Amazing. I might have to watch that again.
They had been fighting a liberation movement called the Mau Mau. The reports said that hundreds of thousands of Kenyans had been put into special camps where they were going to be psychologically adjusted. The British were trying to manipulate what their chief psychologist called the African mind. But what then happened in the camps turned into a frenzied madness. The British used mass torture and killing as they desperately tried to hold on to power.
Sorry to pause it again. I come across this Mau Mau business twice recently. Once, Richard Hilton's Imperial Obituary came back out, and I did the introduction for it. He talks about the Mau Mau stuff in there, where he's like, yeah, why didn't we just use the army to crush them, basically? So that was his kind of like Colonel Blimp take on it. But I read another book recently by a leftist called, is it Calvin Murphy or something like that? He's an Irish guy, but he's a mate of Praise of Folly, Todd. He goes on that channel. I didn't know that before I bought his books. And he's got this book on counter gangs, and there's a whole section in the role of British intelligence in creating counter gangs against the Mau Mau within Kenya in order to create distrust in Kenyan society. Extremely interesting material, actually. It's the same playbook as Antifa and BLM, only against the Mau Mau. So
and there was some absolute horror within the suppression of the Mau Mau rebellion. The figures seem to suggest we killed about 20,000 of the militants, and interned about 80,000 people. Some people think it's higher, 300,000, 450,000. And there were kind of horrors because we attempted to kind of parse out the militants from the rest of the Kikuyu population in Kenya. There were massacres, there were atrocities, and there were torture within the camps. And a lot of it was, as you say, there was kind of division where the Mau Mau in the camps tried to keep people on side by getting them to swear oaths. Yeah. And essentially people who wouldn't were tortured and mutilated. I mean, they would do horrible things. They'd get like the corrugated iron off the roofs of the shelters and slash people open with them.
What this Murphy chap was saying in this book, What is a Counter Gang, which I recommend to everybody because it's just absolutely fascinating. He was saying that this British intelligence guy, whose name I forget now, Kitson, I think it was, something Kitson, funded all of these covert counter gangs and basically did loads of false flags where these atrocities that the Mau Mau were going to have done, loads of them were done by these other counter gangs, and they pinned them on the Mau Mau to sow distrust of the Mau Mau, in the Kenyan population. So, I mean, I don't know how much of that is true, but it sounds pretty true because he was taking it directly from this British intelligence guy, basically explaining what he had done in a book later on. So kind of interesting.
The psychologist they're talking about here was a guy called J.C. Carruthers, who he observed Africans and he wrote a lot about African psychology, mental health. And an interesting thing that I picked up is that he looked at rural Africans and he said that he identified they lived in a world of sound, which was interesting because it meant that the spoken word would retain a kind of magic with them, whereas in the West, children rapidly moved to kind of visual processing of information because they learned to read.
Interesting.
And he linked that to what he thought of as mental immaturity and hysterical patterns, which he said were more commonly seen in African women than European women, and psychopathic traits that he thought were more common in African men than in Europeans.
Very interesting.
Enoch Powell was quite outraged by a lot of this stuff, wasn't it? By Britain's behaviour. I don't know why. He was quite a idiosyncratic figure, wasn't he?
Well, he wasn't the kind of cartoon racist that the left make him out to be at all.
No. He had
imperialist with a conscience, so to speak.
Yes, he sympathised with the colonial subjects, didn't he? I think.
Yeah.
Didn't he grow up abroad or something? Was he one of those who like?
No, but he fell for India, didn't he? He said that he actually he had an emotional eureka with India, having slept there. He said he slept on a train platform, and when he woke up, I found that I'd fallen in love with India. So quite odd. But no, he grew up in Edgbaston, I think.
I was going to say that there were some horrifically traumatized people who came
Just to give, just to add to that and give a bit of a counterpoint to Adam Curtis's broad take here, is like the Mau Mau, I think, like Mugabe's forces and like the Viet Cong and various sort of usually leftist, anti-colonial, terroristic, usually Marxist armies, they fought in such a way as to force the colonial power to either adopt extreme measures like what we sort of concentration camps, weren't we, like, or strategic hamlets or whatever, but like concentrating the population into certain areas so the rest of the area could be swept, and killed or whatever, things like that, or just concentrate people to be able to surveil them. And like the Mau Mau approach, as I understand it, was to force Britain to do things like that, to go to extreme lengths to defeat them, to force them to resort to torture and stuff as well, or to obviously drive them out and yield the whole land, the whole country, to a very tiny minority of Marxist extremists who would have taken over and installed something like, Mengistu's regime or something, probably. And the left-wing anti-colonial intellectual just immediately, as soon as it's plausible anyway, grants them that win. It just says, like, of course they represented the country, they were the legitimate force or whatever. These like really bad people.
Yeah, I mean, there was one massacre. They just would get 70 men, women, children, put them in huts and set fire to them. This is the Mau Mau to their own people. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just just always left out of the story of British crimes and all this shit.
They did do quite a sneaky job, though, of divide and conquer, and in terms of the psychological operations and so on, they were up to all sorts of things that the British they used, because it was one of the times where they concentrated more on, I guess, what we'd call like gay ops or psyops than conventional warfare, right? In this particular scenario, which is probably why it's of interest to Curtis, I'd imagine. What actually happened? What was the actual upshot after, like, when it was all said and done? Kenya did become independent at some point, didn't it?
Yeah, I think the Mau Mau were totally defeated. I think Britain's tactics did work and won, but there was just Jomo Kenyatta and other leftist Kenyan independence movement rose up at the same time as Harold Macmillan was already preparing to just hand it all away anyway. So
the guy I was talking about, by the way, is called Frank Kitson, and his actual book was called Gangs and Counter Gangs, which basically details what the counterinsurgency campaign of the British was, and some of the sneaky tactics they used. And the Imperial Obituary book basically is saying, like, Hilton's view was like, yeah, but we should have just held on to Kenya anyway. Like, why did they let it become independent at all? After they'd gone to all that trouble, they should have just maintained it,
it's like a whole other force cut across all these events. Like, same with, there was the stuff in Cyprus, and there was stuff in Yemen, like what we watched in, the Mayfair set. But just like the Macmillan wave of thinking, Ian MacLeod, them guys, the left of the Tory party just decided anyway in the early 60s, like, there's a wind of change, we're just going to change everything. And then Dennis Healey carried that on under Labour as well, and others.
So is that just American pressure, or like, why did they just give up? They gave up, didn't they? Just gave up.
Yeah, that I can't immediately answer that. I'm not sure. Money was obviously a factor. Money was definitely a factor in what we saw in the Mayfair set, where Healey was like, we just can't afford anything east of Aden now, right? Or east of Suez, was it? That was a money thing. That was a finance problem. But Macmillan and MacLeod had already started their thing some years before that, so not really sure. Sorry. It was a lot to do with joining the common market, obviously, which we hadn't done yet. But it was at the same time as Macmillan was trying to convince, what's his name, the French guy, de Gaulle, to drop his objections to Britain joining the common market, which in fact failed. But Macmillan, it was partly that.
If you have a look at what I'm saying is, if you look at the actions of the British state in Kenya, it just makes no sense. All of this time, all of this attention, all this money, all this effort, and then you just give up anyway.
I think they did the right thing. Basically, they did what they needed to in the context of keeping Kenya, and then just from above, for different reasons, Kenya was just given away anyway.
Bizarre.
Do you know what I mean? Like the people on the ground, the governors and stuff, and the military basically did the right thing, but just cutting across that a whole different historical force was Macmillan wants to give it all away and join the common market. It was largely about joining the common market, which is a whole nother story. But,
The government in London denied all the accusations, but the rumours of violence and horror continued. And what had also not gone away was the fear and hatred inside the minds of many of the British, of the others, the people the British had ruled over, who were now coming to what they had been told was the homeland.
Turns out those fears were pretty well founded, I would say. I mean, were they not?
Mm.
And also, he says they were told that Britain was the homeland. Who told them that? Did the
British government, basically.
Yeah, right. Did the common folk of Surbiton or whatever write them a letter going, "You should be over here"? Like, of course not.
You'll see there'll be an interview with a guy called Michael De Freitas or Michael X, and he'll talk a little bit about that. And I'll post the fuller clip of the interview after the show.
I was going to make a video. I actually was going to make a video about this because a couple of weeks ago I made this video called "Capitalism Causes Immigration and Feminism," and I was expecting a bit of I got a little bit of pushback, but not that much. But there's this this guy who's got a channel called Zarathustra's. I'm trying to remember what the channel is called now, but he's long time fan and so on. But he's written this. He's said some questions for Dr. Parvini. Zarathustra Leviathan, right? Is this small channel? But he sent me this this morning, and I started to watch it. And he was saying, look, it was a socialist government where all this stuff came in, and the immigration really starts then. And I would say a large part of the immigration between 1945 and Thatcher 79, say, is basically all of this, right? It is the wrapping up of the empire, and then basically the welcoming in of people who were in some way bound up with the British administrative state, right? And then you have, the Asians who were kicked out of Uganda. That was Priti Patel came in that wave, didn't she? Did Sunak come in them as well? I mean, I'm just saying, there were waves of people who were basically quote unquote coming home as the empire was wrapping up, and a lot of those people, if you look into them, were on the right side of the colonial administration back then. Now there's some new revolutionary or nationalist force in. They're not going to stay there because they were loyal to the empire. So, they kind of offer them a place here. That accounts for a lot of that post-war immigration. Have I got that wrong, Horace? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's bound up with colonial wrap-up, basically, isn't it?
Well, yeah, obviously the 48 Nationalities Act was to do that as well. That was intended to give people, I think the idea was, native British people, but who were born all over the empire, the right to come back without any administrative difficulties. But it also happened to apply to the whole colonial population as well. But then, especially with the waves of people who came in from Uganda and Kenya, who were Indian people, but worked for the British Empire, or were just merchants under the British Empire. That was just very directly there was a crisis. India refused to take them. And the British prime ministers of the time said, like they did argue about it a bit, but they did, yeah.
Another big event that can't be overlooked. And again, I don't want to sound like a kind of leftist post-colonialist here, but this is just history, right? The partition of India, where they created Pakistan and what is now Bangladesh, it was East and West Pakistan originally, is one of the largest mass migrations ever in human history, where basically the state of India said to the Muslims, well, it was like in cooperation with the British, India becomes independent and we're going to do this partition thing, huge upheaval of lots and lots of people. And there was a certain percentage of those people, for whatever reason, who were offered a place to come here instead, rather than being forced to go and live in Pakistan or Bangladesh. So that was part of that as well. And again,
there was also,
go on, Horace.
So, well, there was a big dam project in Kashmir that accounts for a lot of the Kashmiris who moved over here. For some reason, Britain supporting or funding a dam or something meant that all the people who were displaced by the dam, like the floodplain or whatever, the flood zone, were just given the right to move into, like, I don't know, Lancashire and stuff. Well, Britain anyway. That's what accounts for a lot of the Mirpuris, who are where a lot of the rape gangs.
So I don't want to like ring fence Windrush and all this sort of stuff, but I do think you have to look at these migration waves in a slightly different light from the mass immigration that we've had since Blair, or certainly since Boris wave. It's got a completely different stripe and different circumstances.
97, like Blair and his government especially promoted the idea of human rights, right? And a lot of people have been able to stay who were illegals and asylum seekers and stuff under what Blair and Mike O'Brien and Barbara Roche changed in their first year or two, right? Which was, we specifically want to make it hard to deport people. So that was a lot of really bad people and stuff. But that's how loads of Somalis and Afghans and Kosovans and started getting in from the late 90s. Plus, I think just at some point, I don't know if it was under Blair or under Cameron or what, but it just became okay. And I don't know exactly what I mean by that, but it became considered okay amongst themselves to just openly start saying that wages are too high. We just they got certain roundabout ways of doing it, but basically, the data says we need lower wages, so just bring in millions of new people, and that seems to be, certainly the thinking behind Boris and Patel, what they did a few years ago, right? They were just openly like like that Dominic Cummings. I know it's probably just a very glib comment, but he said, "I want to make friends with the FT," and the FT says that the data says that just bring in loads of cheap people.
And then to, I think, call back to a video AA did a while ago about it was to pay for the pensions as well.
Yeah, and of course COVID era inflation, money printing.
The actual economics there doesn't add up, but I could well believe that they believed it did, or just use that as a pretext. Yeah.
Just a brief context on this clip here we're going to see of the Indian man going into the barbers. This is from a 1966 documentary called Smethwick, A Straw in the Wind. This barbers was in Smethwick near Birmingham. And the reason it probably had the documentary made was because in 1964, the Conservative MP who was elected there, Peter Griffiths, famously put out leaflets. I won't say the word, but...
I know the leaflet. It's a famous one, yeah.
If you want an N for a neighbour, vote Liberal or Labour.
Now listen carefully to this Indian's conversation with a white barber when he entered a saloon with a BBC radio microphone in his pocket.
No.
What's the matter?
No.
Anything wrong?
Yes.
Boss, what is it?
I said no.
Would I like to know what is the matter?
Closed.
Well, it's another half an hour yet.
Well, I'm closed now.
But you're going to put the clothes on outside in the window, did you?
Well, you clear up.
Look, if you give me any reason why, what's the matter, then I shall go. If you tell me...
I'm telling you I'm closed.
You're not closed. You ain't closed yet.
Well, I am. To you.
Pause, please. Do we know what year that was?
That's 66.
Right, so that is a setup by the race relations industry. That is like the first Race Relations Act, I think, was passed in 66, wasn't it? Under Frank Soskis, who had come in through an earlier migration wave. I
think it's 65.
Right, yeah, and then the second Race Relations Act was 68. And what it was all about was this in the first place. This was the spear tip, right? It was like just find places where people are basically not obeying the immigration sort of agenda, as in like you have to integrate with them, and start trapping them like this, like sending guys in with microphones and proving that they're racist, and thus using that as a pretext for legislation, and then obviously rigorously enforcing that legislation. And that is one law that they really do dedicate resources to enforcing, right?
No, this is also gets back to libertarianism 101, right? Because what we have just witnessed is basic freedom of association, right? I.e., basically that is a trade.
Property rights.
It's basically a trade, an agreement between the customer and the business owner as to whether they want to engage in this transaction. And the business owner basically was like, no, I don't want this bit of business. I do not agree to the trade. I don't agree to the deal. And the authorities basically are saying, that's not allowed. It's not allowed. You have to serve him.
So businesses start to become servants of the state to that extent, It's you work for us, you work for our political beliefs, you work for our agenda. You do as we say. It's not your business.
Well, yeah, that's great. That's Graeber's idea that the structural violence changes to the coercion of the governing regime against those rights.
No, this is actually mental. If you actually start to think about it from brass tacks, right? This bloke has set up a business to cut people's hair. And now, just by dint of the fact that he has this business, the state says you have to cut this man's hair. It's mental if you think about it.
Yep. Forced association. This is exactly the same as the civil rights thing. I mean, the Race Relations Acts were just copied over by Anthony Lester, who had gone to America as a young lawyer and just joined in the civil rights movement. He just said, we need this in Britain as well. He was of the same ethnic ancestry as Frank Soskis, the Home Secretary. And then Roy Jenkins took over this agenda and made it his own a couple of years in the years after.
Now, is there another way to... I'm again thinking with my centre-left hat on here. Is there another way that we could argue this, right? If you notice on the gentleman's hairdresser sign, it says open, right? Is the fact that he's put that sign there saying open,
no,
does it oblige him to serve this man?
Of course not. Of course not. But I think these people, like the civil rights and race relations movements, they are the most profoundly evil people in all our history. Like, well, up there with the very worst. Like, true calculated malevolence. Just, we are going to destroy your society. We're taking over. There's nothing that needs to be uprooted more. All these laws have got to be cancelled. Anyone who won't do it is not our friend. It's a mark of it is how you draw the line between friend and enemy. Are you against this?
Now, here's another question. If I'm correct in understanding, businesses do actually reserve the right not to serve people on certain conditions, right? So let's just say he went in there and started kicking things. The barber would be within his rights not to serve him, right? Or I don't know, or everywhere you go now, it says there's a big sign saying we will not tolerate people being offensive to our staff and this sort of stuff, right? Which presumably means that under certain conditions they've got the right to refuse service. So I find it interesting that this situation was weaponized against the barber, but now if you go to a lot of services, it's almost like they've been weaponized against you. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because there are those signs. We will not tolerate offensive behaviour towards staff, everywhere.
And it's quite forward as well. It's like they sort of assume that everyone's going to be offensive and aggressive and stuff, don't they? It's like directed at everyone. Like it's like I wasn't going to be rude to your staff. What are you talking about?
Weird, isn't it? It's very strange. Okay.
That's partly just a sign of like just general rising anger as well, isn't it? Like people are just getting pissed off at everything.
Again, it's part of that bureaucratization that reinforces the perception of the structured violence, so to speak.
Those who came from the Empire to Britain were shocked by the strange country they found. Michael de Freitas had come from Trinidad. He had grown up with a picture of a strong and confident homeland.
Same as Paul Ince's dad, by the way, just FYI.
At the centre of the Empire.
I'll just add something about Andrew Joyce wrote an excellent essay about the origins of the Windrush about 10, 12 years ago, showing who made that happen, the Windrush. And one really interesting aspect of it was that the Gleaner newspaper, the biggest newspaper in Jamaica, which advertised, encouraged people to take that trip, which they wouldn't have known about otherwise, portrayed Britain as like really hot, sunny, beautiful, rich. There's just money flowing everywhere. And loads of people who came from Jamaica said, when I got here, it was like, I couldn't believe how depressing it was. I've been led to believe that this place was paradise. And it's like really drab and like grim looking and depressing, and people are glum. And it was like, right, so, I mean, even they were victims of it in a way, it sort of leaves open the question of why they stayed.
This is literally the substance of the interview that De Freitas is going to be shown a clip of in a minute. I mean, the full interview, he'll talk about how the problem. I mean, he's a difficult figure, De Freitas, because he is kind of very quietly thoughtful. He's on the one hand, he's this enforcer for Rackman, the slum landlord, and a sort of gangland figure. And the other, when you watch the interview with him, he's very measured, very considered. He's very bright. He's not stupid. And he talks about, we were told, sing Rule Britannia, all of this stuff. We came here and, they told us to F off. And the bit, this Curtis doesn't feature here, but in the full interview, he says it was just like a love rejected. That's how we felt. So that's the case he's making.
They'd been led to believe that something beautiful and lovely was waiting for them.
Yeah. I mean, you be the judge.
Instead, what he found was what seemed to him a sad and frightened country.
You must remember that when we came to this country, we were not traveling to a foreign country. I was taught when I was a young man that my country, Trinidad, was an extension of this one. We were weaned on the concept of the empire. When I was a young boy, I stood in 90 degrees of sun day after day and sang all kind of silly things like God Save the Queen, Land of Hope and Glory, Britannia Rule the Waves, with the greatest of fervor, and believed every word of it. To come here and discover that not only wasn't I not traveling to the capital of the whole thing, which we were led to believe was so, but in actual fact we weren't wanted, has been a very shattering blow. Many people in this country who think that we are very hateful are so wrong.
You see, this is the great mystery. When you came here, you say you found you weren't wanted. Why then did you stay? Why did you choose to stay here?
This was the heartland of the whole thing, and one hoped, against hope, that what one saw was not right.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because, he has been sold a lie in a way. They lied to them the same as they lied to the British public.
Yeah. And an interesting piece of music Curtis chooses here. It's a song called Song for Zula by a band called Phosphorescent. But there's an interesting lyric in it, and it says, "I saw love disfigure me." Just interesting thought.
What tune? Pause, please. What tune is this, Simon?
That's this song, Song for Zula, by a band called Phosphorescent.
Okay.
But I know love as a fading thing, just as fickle as a feather in a stream. See, honey, I saw love. You see, it came to me. It put its face up to my face so I could see. Yeah, figure me into something.
Interesting choice of moustache yet again from they love it, don't they, these guys?
I am not recognizing. See the Cajun call. I said, come on in. I will not open myself up this way.
Mao Zedong's wife was going mad. She was called Jiang Qing.
One of the most classic
Right.
Curtis non-secateurs of all time.
Just
What the
lets it drop.
Just like, yep, but now we're going to talk about Mao.
She lived alone, surrounded by pet monkeys and nurses who she was convinced were conspiring against her. Those in
This
charge
was a
of the
fantasy.
revolution in China had completely marginalized her. She was too dangerous, they thought, to be allowed anywhere near her husband or power. They had even sent her to Moscow to be locked in a sanatorium with real and imagined illnesses.
Curious parallels with Lenin's wife that we talked about before, Simon. If you remember?
Yeah.
Sorry, what? You were talking about Lenin's wife without me? I'm into Lenin's wife. What?
Well, I
There's
thought
the
we-
Krupskaya.
Do you remember when we had it paused on the bust of Lenin for about an hour? I'm sure during the course of that discussion, were you on that show? I think you were.
Yeah, I did miss one, but yeah, I think I was there. I must have. Sorry,
Yeah.
I missed out on.
I'm sure she came up during the course of that at some point.
You've
But
done
they
some pro-
they also had this thing where they were keeping Lenin's wife away from him, and you know, Stalin and Molotov basically got to say when anybody could see him and stuff like that. Kind of.
In the Soviet sort of pantheon, Stalin's your boy, right? Do you have an equivalent in China? Like, do you like?
No, unfortunately, China just remains opaque to me in all ways. Mainly just because like the names are too hard. You know, it sounds like a funny. You know, there are certain things that just seem too hard to get into, like anything to do with like Poland. Names are too hard. I mean, Ukraine's been a bit like that. It's been going on for 3 years now. I still, apart from Kiev, I still don't know it. I can't, you know, I watched Iran, but I still like barely know any of the names because they're just
Prague,
too difficult.
That's one of them. Bucharest, no, that's
a different country.
Zaporozhye, that's one of them. Donetsk.
Donetsk, yeah. So I got the Donetsk, Donbass region. We got there. You know,
I'm just thinking about the this idea of on the left, the political leaders that the spouses or the wives are sort of kept away from closeness to the political leader. I'm just thinking about it in Britain. You see, conservative right-wing prime ministers nominally. The wife isn't so much of a feature, or the spouse isn't so much of a feature.
There was Sam Cam, wasn't there? Sam, do you remember there was that? She was kind of like
sorry. I mean, I should say on the right, yes, it's made a feature. On the left, it's not made a feature. If you see what I mean. So Keir Starmer comes in, but his wife is kept at a distance from.
Well,
she
did make an appearance recently, didn't she?
Yeah.
And in fact, I made a rare meme. Should I share my? I very rarely make memes, but I did make a meme on this occasion. You want to see it?
The left keep the women out of.
There was the meme.
Except
that's a picture.
Yeah. This little Ukrainian lad. So
except
anyway.
Cherie Blair was everywhere, wasn't she? And her sister even.
Yeah, and that's the interesting transgression that Blair makes, isn't it? That she is kind of a character.
And a power player within herself as well.
Who was that? Who was that lady who people thought controlled Harold Wilson? Marsha Falkendale.
Right,
but she wasn't his wife. She was like his assistant, but she was like more trusted than his wife. Anyway, sorry, I'm trying to poke holes in your claim.
Who was John Major's wife?
Norma,
that was it.
Major.
Of course, he was with Edwina on the side, wasn't he?
Yeah, sort of identifiable. But if you'd asked me, like Harold Wilson, or I wouldn't be able to identify.
Apparently,
the woman
Michael
there.
Foot's wife convinced him to run for leader, and when he shouldn't have, and he was the worst mistake Labour ever made, or whatever.
The left keeping the women down.
It's true, isn't it?
But now, Jiang Qing's husband was facing disaster.
Based Labour, no women leaders ever. woke Tories. They've had 3 so far.
The left are more right.
In fact, no, 4 if you include Kemi Badenoch.
I don't include Kemi Badenoch. She's never going to.
No, I keep on,
confidently say she's not going to be Prime Minister.
I keep on forgetting her. I made that card thing the
She
other
is.
day, and completely she slipped my mind. So there was no Kemi Badenoch card, and I was doing an interview in London on Monday, which should come out soon. And during the course of that, I literally forgot who was the Tory leader. Genuinely, I was like, who's the Tory leader again? And of course, it's Kemi Badenoch. So she is really, really a non-entity, isn't she?
The revolution had led to horror. 30 million people had died from starvation in the past 3 years. The other leaders wanted to get rid of him. And suddenly, he called for her. Jiang Qing was an extraordinary person. She believed in nothing except the power of her will to shape reality. She had begun as an actor in films in Shanghai in the 1930s. The other actors looked down at her for her driving ambition.
She liked to be on the top, you see, always. She's a very ambitious woman, and she liked to be at top, and she plays with, with all the directors, cameramen, make them, pay attention, you see, and interest in her, so she can have better part of the film. She married a quite famous writer called Tang Na, and after married, she doesn't feel very satisfied about her husband, because her husband is not the very, very strong man, and she left him, and he jumped to the river, and then the water was very cold, so he jumped up again, you see. So
you mean he tried to commit suicide?
Yes, he's trying to commit suicide.
After the suicide attempt, Jiang Qing wrote a long letter to her husband. It said she was leaving him, and also explained why with an extraordinary openness. There were powerful forces inside her, she said, that kept driving her towards fame and power. And it was only those forces that held her together psychologically. Nothing must hold them back. It ended, "What matters is that you remember me as a woman who never caves in before anyone, and who will never bear to be treated as inferior to men." But Jiang Qing failed to become a star. The men who ran the studios scorned her ambition. Her most famous part was as a supporting actor in a film called Bloodshed on Wolf Mountain. The star of the film was called Li Lily. Jiang Qing was convinced that Li was trying to upstage her all the time. And she became the focus of all Jiang Qing's anger over her treatment by the Shanghai establishment.
Tell you what, Mao, I wouldn't go there, mate. She's got trouble written all over.
Theatre kids. This is the problem.
It's like ultimate all about Eve, Simon.
Yeah. She does a lot of what they call in the business pulling focus.
Bitter and disillusioned, Jiang Qing left Shanghai and travelled to join the communist resistance on a remote mountain in Yunnan. The camp was an intense, exciting place. and many of the young revolutionaries had affairs. Sex was called undisciplined guerrilla warfare. But when Jiang Qing started an affair with the leader, Mao Zedong, that was different. She was scorned by the other revolutionaries as a social climbing upstart. Then it got worse. Mao announced that he was going to divorce his wife and marry Jiang Qing.
I did not know this bit of Mao lore. Fascinating stuff.
The other communist leaders were horrified. They saw Jiang Qing as a dangerous, destructive force, because she was driven by a fierce, radical individualism that threatened their collective dream.
This is Commie Yoko Ono. Amazing.
In the communist structure, everyone was part of a unit. She insisted, I am a unit of one. No one could work out what to do. They even went and asked Stalin in Moscow for his advice. He said, let them marry. But Jiang Qing must sign a document promising to refrain from political activity for 30 years.
Hey, Stalin. Yes. Just the perfect solution.
Straight
in there.
But has he not also sort of forgotten, like, I mean, what, like, who's going to enforce that document? I mean, what, like,
well,
what,
I mean,
like,
the party.
The party.
Okay.
The Politburo, Secretariat.
She signed, but she was furious with the men who now controlled her. They even tracked down and destroyed prints of her old films, because they didn't fit with the image of Mao's wife. Her fury grew. Jiang Qing wanted power on her own behalf, as an individual. And she wanted revenge. Now, 20 years later, in 1959, Mao was facing disaster, and he was calling for her. In America, the idea of individualism had become central to the politics of the Cold War.
Of course, in today's environment, Mao's wife would have become a conservative influencer in America, wouldn't she? That'd be the absolutely ideal scenario. She's running a...
What are you, bulletproof? Get out from behind that tree.
Because it was what defined the United States against the collective ideology of Russia. At the heart of it was the picture of a strong, confident individual living an independent life in the new giant suburbs outside the old cities.
My gun won't shoot that far.
But there was a weakness, because the people in the suburbs were alone. And in their isolation, away from the old communities, they started to become fearful and lost. Out of these fears came a paranoia that was fueled by groups on the extreme right, like the John Birch Society.
To the Republic for which...
You want to do any defence of the John Birchers for us?
Sorry, I lost a bit there. What is he accusing them of getting wrong there?
Well, he's saying because of the suburban isolation in these kind of largely artificial development strips that were created. You know, the places like Levittown that I talked about ages ago, back in Century of the Self, that people became lonely and therefore more prone to paranoia. They were sort of in these unmoored kinds of places where the communities were very artificial. And this was a thing whereby, you know, you did have a lot of, when the sort of UFO craze started, you had a lot of people being hoaxed, you know, giving away their money, you know, because the Space Brothers were going to land and take them off to Venus or whatever. So there was a sort of pliable population that, and they were kind of experimented on, you know, essentially, eventually. And this is kind of, this sort of led to, you know, part of the, you know, the rise of the Boomer Truth regime. In a sense, these people were exposed to sort of countercultural forces that were semi-synthesized by the government, by intelligence agencies and so on. This isn't, you know, this isn't conspiracy theory as such. It's just sort of the stuff that happened. So the idea is that these people were not linked into organic communities, and the John Birchers came in, and to an extent, I think people read that they do a bit of, what we see today with sloppyism of, injecting powerful narratives about the nation, but at the same time, they'll drop something that might be fake news, but it rallies the troops. Yeah? Am I right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I read the book by the founder of the John Birch Society, and I mean, anyone who's into the JQ would sort of disparage these guys because they point to a lot of stuff that is actually probably, I won't say the word, but world that people, and calls it the international communist conspiracy. But my reading of the history of sort of the 30s, 40s, 50s is that the sort of people that they were accusing of taking over, i.e. people sympathetic to communism, did take over America. Primarily Franklin Roosevelt and all of his people. I would say there, as in Britain, that government was not just a government, it was a new regime. And also the power of the Rockefellers and the Rockefeller Foundations and things like this. They did support loads of Marxist subversives coming in from abroad, including the Frankfurt School, to start spreading Marxist ideas in America. It's not the case that Roosevelt was a communist or that he secretly instituted communism or anything. So all that stuff is daft. But from what I've read, the substantial claims of the Birchers was in the right area. It's nothing to do. It's not. Well, But what I think what Curtis is saying is the Hofstadter theory, right? The paranoid style and all this, which is bullshit. It's just that's just a blunt defense of the ruling elite. So.
I mean, a couple of things to mention on the Birchers. One is that a lot of the material, the raw material that formed this quote unquote conspiracy, was literally given to them by well-known CIA operative, James Burnham himself, who wrote a book which I tracked down and bought and have on my shelf, called The Web of Subversion, published in the 50s, which basically explains, naming names, organizations, individuals, who exactly the subversives in the FDR administration and in the American system were. Right, so James Burnham himself gave them that information. So it's not like there was nothing there. There was something there. I'll also mention that a few of the more out there people, or a few of the more, how can I say, militant types, like Revelo P. Oliver was one, I believe was kicked out of the John Birch Society.
I think he was drummed out for being anti-Semitic.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, the Koch brothers were in there as well, I think.
To be fair, Revelo P. Oliver is probably the most anti-Semitic man ever to have lived, ever. Ever. I mean, I did include the mid-century German in that, but, so they also had their own kind of gatekeeping, to some extent. So
but as you say, they were managed to be kind of suggestible, as well as being. When I read about them, I don't know much about them, but when I read about them, I thought, wow, this impressively energetic kind of network. But then, Buckley and the National Review people kind of denounce them on the one side. Ayn Rand denounces them, and she says, well, it's not enough because they're just against communism, but they're not for capitalism.
There's some truth to that. Yeah, I mean, Birch is probably that society probably appealed to more like nationalists, like economic Patrick Buchanan type people, like American nationalists, not necessarily free marketeers or anything like that. Yeah,
and I believe they're back. At least they've got a Twitter handle, the Birchers. I see them on Twitter occasionally. So there's a kind of John Birch Society 2.0 currently active. So.
I mean, do you guys see? Like, they could mention the LaRouches as well. That's another interesting, sort of weird. I don't know. Anyway, but like, would you guys say that Curtis is doing the sort of pathologizing his enemies thing?
I think that is a kind of framing here that is very easy to sell on the liberal left BBC. That it's fundamental to America, this level of sort of paranoia that's kind of unreasonable. But as you say, on the one hand, they are rightly suspicious of subversive infiltrations. At the same time, they're being fed the pap that.
And he wants us to link it with them insisting on their rights, especially their gun rights. He wants that to seem paranoid and idiotic, doesn't he? Like, I think that's what he's saying.
Not that particular issue, that as far as I can see, but yeah, I think there is a sort of a predictable characterization of a certain part of the populist right as being sort of too suggestible. But it's difficult when I look at the things that the Birchers were in favor of to be saying, well, I'm not too far in disagreement with a lot of this stuff, but at the same time I do object to being treated like a naive rube.
Absolutely,
yeah. There's also a layer of complication in here as well, right? With McCarthy, this web of subversion thing, and just the phrase communism. Because, how can I put this? Not all communists were Soviets. Some were Trotskyists. Some were, were basically just like friendly to America. Some were being funded by America. Some were literal CIA operations, you know what I mean?
And some of them fused Trotskyism with a new kind of like Cold War nationalism as well, didn't they? And that was the neocons, that was the New York intellectuals and so on, right?
Yeah,
they were Trotskyists.
And they had it in their interest to fuel, for lack of a better word, paranoia about commies, Pinkos under the bed and all of that.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see why James Burnham, as an original neocon, as a former Trotskyist, would in the 50s have it in his interest to, and I mean, I've found a copy of this book online here. I do have my own copy somewhere, but I'll just show you. Look, he goes through war, like each agencies and White House, Pentagon, like he literally maps it all out in this book. And this was fairly widely disseminated. Like it was had a piece on it in the New York Times and things like that. If something is being published in the New York Times, right, by James Burnham, that they want you to see it. Do you know what I mean?
So they were happy to feed the Birchers because it was a kind of useless opposition in a way.
It provides us, it provides a sort of a dialectic to engage with them also at the same time, encouraging the flourishing of counterculture. We talked about this previously, where literally the CIA started dropping LSD, in various kind of setups into the system to encourage people towards, that kind of version of rebellion that would be in conflict with, the Birchers. The Birchers are embodying, again, Graeber's structural violence. It's a kind of reaction to the external world. And the counterculture rejects paranoia. It's about, connectivity, getting in touch with yourself, man.
What they were up to in the 50s there, Burnham and friends, is they actually wanted to build a robust anti-commie right, like a kind of cold warrior right, if you want to put it that way. And in much the same manner, like how Alex Jones is like a mental anti-China hawk, right? Right, and the same way Alex Jones brings certain information in, some of it's good, some of it's not. Structurally, I think the Birchers were doing that for the American right back in the 50s and the 60s, as part of a general anti-Soviet strategy, So anyway, let's go on.
One nation under God, indivisible.
They said that the American government had been taken over by hidden groups, controlled by the communists. And at the end of the 1950s, a theory spread like wildfire through the suburbs that President Eisenhower himself had really been put into power by the communists. He is a dedicated, conscious agent of the Russians, the head of the John Birch Society said. That conclusion is based on detailed evidence so extensive that it is beyond any reasonable doubt.
Well, and again, remember Alex Jones, Bannon to some extent, this persists, right? There is a widespread belief, or there was, that Joe Biden had been put into power by the Chinese, right? That exists today. So you can see like the same playbook in a way.
And of course, and
go on,
Russiagate has a lot of Russiagate has a lot of parallels as well, right? The idea of Trump as a Russian stooge.
Yeah, and then on the other side, they've said, "Oh, well, Trump has been put in as a Russian stooge."
And Farage and Brexit, that was Russia as well. Le Pen.
They're even now they're accusing Farage of being a Russia stooge,
yeah.
Which is bizarre when Richard Tice is kissing that wall. But anyway, let's carry on.
But this paranoia was not a new thing. An influential political scientist called Richard Hofstadter published an article that caused a sensation. He said that there had always been a dark paranoia built into America from the very start. The first settlers had come from Europe to America to flee from the corruption of power in the old world. But although they had got away from the old power, they hadn't got away from their suspicious minds. And alone, out in the vast wilderness of the new America, that led them to imagining dark, hidden conspiracies in their own government, far away in Washington.
See, the thing is that they were absolutely correct to be suspicious of the American government, as any watching of Curtis's own work would show you. But maybe the only bit that's wrong is that it was Soviet infiltrated. You know what I mean?
The thing about Eisenhower being an agent of the Russians, no, he wasn't. That's being silly, and he says beyond any doubt as well. No, it's just totally doubtful. So it's I can see how this worked as a kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but like a disinfo machine. Like it captures and misdirects right-wing
a containment mechanism,
to make them useless, whereas they could be a threat otherwise.
But there was definitely something going on in the American government all throughout this time. Just a different,
I see that as like what people do with Israel as well, and like what people do with politicians in general. They don't want to conclude the worst of them. They want. It's strange, like, because he's accusing the darkest possible thing of Eisenhower, but I think people also didn't want to accept that ever since the 30s, ever since Roosevelt got in, at least, you had a left-wing regime which was positively sympathetic to the Soviets, at least for geopolitical reasons and stuff. People want to believe it's an agent who's under control. They don't want to believe that their politicians have betrayed them for real. Out of conviction. But when they had.
One of the first of these, in the early 19th century, said that a secret group from Europe called the Bavarian Illuminati were running a giant conspiracy in America to destroy the new democracy. In reality, the Illuminati had been a utopian movement.
Sorry, I paused too soon again. It's probably going to have an interesting end to the sentence, but I do think this also accords with it's very similar practice and like very similar habits to what is done now with Britain as well. Like the idea that Tom Luongo has stirred up or tried to stir up hasn't really taken hold, but the idea that the British control everything as well. Same with the Illuminati. It's like, why are you reaching back to the Illuminati? That really was just Bavaria 250 years ago. That's not still in control of things. It was a secret society back then. Why? Like, do you know what I mean? And like, why are people reaching for the City of London? Do you know, this is a strain of thinking among some people. It's like Tom Luongo, especially, he knows about the other tribe, the other financial tribe. Like, he knows that, and he's saying it's like people want to avoid the obvious. It's like, no, your politicians are bad. Your politicians went bad, and they are bad people. They're not under the control of some alien force. It's them. They're the problem. Anyway, I don't know. This really gets my goat.
Who wanted to replace religion with reason. But instead, they now became the first of a series of frightening suspicions that fed off the isolation of the settlers in the New World.
Pause, please. As I just didn't feel like I made my point very well, I'll give one more example, right? People do it with Klaus Schwab as well, right? People want to believe that Starmer and before him others as well were doing what they're doing because they're controlled by the WEF or by Klaus Schwab. It's like, no, No, they go to the WEF because they agree with Klaus Schwab, right? It's a club of people who already have those ideas. They're not agents of him. It's just another example of the same mistake.
The paranoia in the suburbs, Hofstadter said, is just part of a much larger darkness built into the very structure of America itself, that was feeding, yet again, on people's separateness and isolation. But in the same suburbs, there was a new movement rising up that was going to confront and challenge these fears. It was driven by a radical individualism that said that you as an individual can shape the world the way you want it to be.
So this is the other side of the ledger. Again, James Burnham, who paid the piper and all the rest of it. This was also being pushed by the same clandestine forces in the American security state, if you want to put it that way. They kind of deliberately wanted a kind of non-commie left, if you want to put it that way, a kind of different type of radical theology, liberation theology.
If I could
go on.
I was just going to say that I think is the most important thing the CIA has ever done, supporting the centre left. Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I'm just going to add some. I'm just want to read a paragraph from Graeber that might help here. But when Curtis is talking about this sort of dark underpinning in America, and Graeber's got this interesting paragraph, and it goes back to this idea that he talked about, the structural violence, this thing which kind of undergirds society. And he says, actually, the very use of the term structural violence is an excellent case in point. When I first began working on this essay, I simply took it for granted that the term referred to actual violence that operates in an indirect form. Imagine, if you will, some warlike tribe, let's call them the Alphas, that sweeps out of the desert and seizes a swath of land inhabited by peaceful farmers. Let's call them the Amigas. But instead of exacting tribute, they appropriate all the fertile land and arrange for their children to have privileged access to most forms of practical education, at the same time initiating a religious ideology that holds that they are intrinsically superior beings, finer and more beautiful and more intelligent, and that the Amigas, now largely reduced to working on their estates, have been cursed by the divine powers for some terrible sin and have become stupid, ugly, and base. And perhaps the Amigas internalize their disgrace and come to act as if they believe they really are guilty of something. In a sense, perhaps they do believe it, but on a deeper level, it doesn't make a lot of sense to ask whether they do or not. The whole arrangement is the fruit of violence and can only be maintained by the continual threat of violence. The fact that the Amigas are quite aware that if anyone directly challenged property arrangements or access to education, swords would be drawn and people's heads would almost certainly end up being lopped off. In a case like this, what we talk about in terms of, quotes, belief, are simply the psychological techniques people develop to accommodate themselves to this reality. We have no idea how they would act or what they would think if the Alpha's command of the means of violence were to somehow disappear.
Interesting, very interesting indeed. I'm kind of reminded also of Louis Althusser, Simon, the theorist of ideology, because he always maintains throughout that essay that in the final analysis, it is down to the repressive state apparatus and violence. In the final analysis, once all the other things have run out, it does come down to the man with the gun. So
sort of what George Orwell says in 1984, like, implicitly as well.
Not accept what the dark fears tell you it is. It would be one of the main foundations of the counterculture movement that was going to spread throughout the West. But now it was just beginning, born out of odd moments across the suburbs of California. One night, Kerry Thornley went with his friend Greg Hill to a bowling alley. They started to discuss reality. Thornley insisted that there was a fixed order to the universe, but Greg said that the universe was chaos, and it was human thought that projected an order onto the chaos.
sitting around in a bowling alley in 1958, to be exact, somewhere in the vicinity of Whittier, California. And we were discussing philosophy, and we were talking about order and chaos. Greg's theory was that order was projected on the universe, that it didn't exist at all, that it was a creation of the human mind, that order was entirely in perception and had nothing to do with what was going on out there in a completely chaotic universe.
Thornley was inspired by this, and together he and Greg Hill decided to set up a movement dedicated to the idea of chaos. They called it Discordianism. Underlying it was the belief that individuals had the power inside themselves to bring order and meaning to the chaos, not the old systems of power that created the fear and suspicion. But then an extraordinary coincidence happened that was going to lead Thornley back towards that darkness in America. Thornley was sent to do service with the Marines, and at the camp he met another recruit who seemed to embody the figure of the free, independent individual he so admired, because he refused to bow to the power of the officers. He was called Lee Harvey Oswald, and they became close friends. Thornley had read the novels of Ayn Rand, and he decided he was going to write a novel with Oswald as the central figure, a hero of this new age. But then suddenly, Oswald defected to the Soviet Union, and things became very strange. It seemed that the reality outside was even more chaotic than he had imagined.
It was really a weird experience for me, because I was writing this novel based on Oswald. When Oswald defected to the Soviet Union, I decided to write a novel about a Marine who becomes disenchanted with the U.S. and goes to the Soviet Union. And so it was like the hero, and I didn't like Kennedy. I was extremely anti-Kennedy myself, because I was so much into Ayn Rand, the laissez-faire capitalism, objectivism, and Kennedy was the arch villain of our movement at that time. And it was like the hero of my novel jumped up off the pages of my book and shot the president. And it was very weird.
What are the chances of that happening, eh? Fucking hell. Fucking hell. What?
No idea what to make of that, to be honest.
Okay. Just one of those things, I guess.
I'll post the full interview with Kerry Thornley afterwards. Interestingly, Adam Curtis has a little chat on stage with Alan Moore, the comic book guy, did Watchmen and V for Vendetta, and I think Alan Moore's into Discordianism, and there was a little conference that was done back in 2018 where he was encountering these ideas, which some people call a kind of a form of a deliberate campaign of revolutionary disinformation. Which again, it balances out the paranoid tendencies of the Birchers with this countervailing investment in the all-knowing wisdom of the individual, which again kind of reinforces the liberal systems of management.
I'm wondering where we should call, because we're never going to get through the whole thing, Simon. Should we?
Yeah.
Try to get to the next end of this segment or something like that, or
go. How far are we through the actual
24?
Oh, let's get up to half an hour if we can.
Let's get half an hour. We'll try to
okay,
let's do it. Are we going to get back to Mao's wife at any point? He just left that kind of dangling, didn't he?
We will, yeah. It'll circle back,
and he's going to go back to Kenya, I suppose, or
yeah.
He's done that Star Wars thing. He set up like loads of different narratives, and
That's
kind
it.
of left them dangling.
Yeah,
We're going to come back to them.
Yeah.
But there's a filmic technique, isn't there? They tell 4 stories at once.
Yeah, we sort of have to let it sort of run for this first episode. There's all these sort of hares he sets running. There's an interesting little bit of footage here about sort of folklore and traditionalism here. This is footage of the Padstow Hobby Horse Festival in North Cornwall, which is just one of these kind of Wicker Man things that we still have going in the UK here. And there's little bits of contrast here between ancient sort of folkloric, almost like conspiracy theory, but tradition, which relies on myths, versus Cold War paranoia that he's doing here.
What are these?
That's Fylingdale, the old US listening station in Yorkshire.
You kiss my blood, and my blood kills me.
Although the British Empire was now finally collapsing, and the last colonies being given their independence, in the homeland, England, the old structure of power remained intact. And not only in the institutions, but inside people's heads as well. The old attitudes of power were still deeply embedded in the minds of the establishment, who dominated the country. Those in charge demanded obedience, not just from those they governed or employed, but also from their wives. They expected them to submit too.
Oh, how awful, Adam.
Like what he said there was overwhelmingly true, except that he just made it about wives at the end. But I really think there's a lot of value in this sense of the internal empire. Like, I'm sure I've said this before, and you guys know already what it means. But we are subjects as well, right? The empire is a few people, is a few thousands, a few tens of thousands of people. And we are subjects of it as well, and we are treated with roughly the same contempt, maybe slightly less, but much the same contempt as anyone else.
Yeah, I'm also reminded. I have a reading of the Shakespeare play As You Like It, and in fact, I have a bit of news on this front because I may have a new Shakespeare book coming out. I've had an email during this show to tell me when it's coming out, but in my reading of As You Like It, they leave the court and they go to the forest of Arden, right? But the interesting thing about that play is that they can never actually leave the court. Like, the court just goes with them. They recreate it wherever they go, because it's a kind of, it's all in, like, the structures of power are in their own minds.
Right.
So you can't ever get outside of the court, because that's the ideology of that time. You know what I mean?
Very much what Curtis is saying, yeah.
Which is exactly what Curtis is saying here. And I might as well, given that I mentioned it now, Foundations of Shakespeare, I did the course. There is a book coming out, and it's a special edition book called Foundations of Shakespeare with Imprint Academic. And they said they wanted to make it a hardback, almost in the folio style, kind of, they wanted to make it like a commemorative thing. So I'll just drop a link to that, but it's not out yet. You can pre-order it. And if you actually bought Foundations of Shakespeare, the course, because it's designed as a textbook for that course, they said they'd give it to you for half price. So if you can prove that you bought the course, send them an email and they'll knock 50 quid off. So there we go. I've dropped that link in, and then we'll carry on.
I am available for personalized audiobook readings of that text.
Yeah, well, there we go. Maybe
if anybody wants them,
maybe I'll get in touch with them and say,
Simon, you could do that service as well, where you're famous and they just get you to say happy birthday to their mate and stuff. You could do them.
Yeah, like Nigel Farage does on his platform.
Yeah.
Sandra Poole had grown up in Africa and the Far East. Her father had been a doctor in the Royal Air Force. She came back to England and became a successful model.
Just don't take that knee.
She'll be the sort of girl straight into ham horror, Simon.
Well.
See on the poster or whatever.
Do you know who what Sandra Paul's name is today?
No.
Sandra Howard. She's married to Michael Howard, the former Tory leader.
So she actually did marry a vampire. Very interesting.
She met Robin Douglas Hume. He was at the heart of the ruling class. His uncle had been Prime Minister.
She was incredibly beautiful. She had a tremendous quality of innocence. And she was, I thought, a vulnerable creature in a highly suspect world, the world of models and fashion, which I despised then, and I despise even more now. And so in a sense, maybe I was trying to rescue her from what I thought was going to be a decline.
Classic, I can fix her.
Mm.
Classic.
In her character, due to her career.
Can you take that leg just that knee a little wider, out that way?
Sort of, really.
That's right.
But she was earning considerably more than you were, and presumably this money was useful in setting up your home, so I suppose you could hardly be resentful about it.
I was earning considerably less, yes.
They married, and Robin Douglas Hume insisted that they went to live in the country. Sandra Paul agreed, but she found that he also insisted that she should stop her modelling career and remain in the country while he went to their house in London.
Then eventually, Robin wanted to be in London more, and he didn't really want the routine so much. He wanted to be going out to parties on his own. And when he realised that if he was in London, I would be in London too, this meant that he had to share his life.
What a bounder Robert he's turned out to be, this chap. Absolute bounder.
And he was beginning to want to be just a little independent.
You mean he was getting bored with you?
Yes, probably, because I used to want to know what he'd been doing or where he'd been, and he didn't want to say, and so we'd have a row. But just because I was wanting to know about his life, and he thought that I shouldn't have to know everything about his life. I felt that when you were married, that you should share things. And
so hold on a second. Married a model, used her money to buy a house in the country, got to stop modelling, and then buggered off to London.
Yeah.
Yeah, not great, mate, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's not all right.
Yeah.
And you should have a right, really, to know what your husband was doing. Even if you wanted to make it up, he should take the trouble to make something up to tell you, so you could put it out of your mind.
Michael de Freitas was now working for a
All right, I reckon probably if we're going to go back to Trinidad, yeah, we should probably call it there, Simon. 29.
Okay, yeah,
29:57. Yeah. How interesting.
Yeah, that's that footage of Sandra Paul. That's from a Wicker's World documentary, Alan Wicker, called "The Stresses of Divorce," and I'll post the link to the full thing after this. But Alan Wicker made interesting documentaries, and you can watch them talking about people talking in the late 60s about the stress of divorce, which was quite a big thing then. You know, I know when I was a kid, it was kind of a big thing when people got divorced.
Yeah.
Not as common as now.
I saw a sign when I was in London. There was a sign in Waterloo Station, and it said 46% of marriages now end in divorce. I was like, oh, that's an interesting. Why are they putting that stat there? And then I saw it was a divorce solicitor. So they were literally selling divorces on the poster. So,
do you reckon Emily is divorced from the other week?
Apparently her name's Beverly. I was corrected by someone in the comments, actually. I misheard her name on the thing, and the video is labelled wrongly. She's called Beverly, actually. So I don't know if that changes your feelings about her. Whether you could cuddle her into baseness.
But like, if she's called Bev, she definitely works in the public sector, I think.
Yeah,
some sort of search,
she would.
Bev. But she sounded middle class the way she spoke, though.
So, let me hit some super chats before we get out of here.
I can save her like that guy can save somebody.
You could.
AJ98 says, on the list of 80s bangers, does the Kinks make the list? My pick would be Better Things. Also, it's worth checking out Ray's solo effort, Return to Waterloo. Pretty bass stuff on the song Expectations. I had Return to Waterloo as a bonus disc on the Best of the Kinks collection I had as a CD. The Kinks do make the list because when I was I'll spoilers everyone, probably be 2026 by the time we get to that year anyway. But late in the list I started to get a bit kind of like bored, probably not, like my mind started to waver, my focus started to waver, so I decided to have a song each from the Beatles. So there's a Paul McCartney song, a John Lennon song, a Ringo Starr song, and a George Harrison song. I can say that the Ringo Starr song is probably the weakest song in the 100.
No
right?
way.
Because I mean, it literally was just included because I was trying to be clever, but to have one song from each Beatle, and then I was like, shit, Ringo Starr hasn't, like, its songs are crap. And then I thought, well, why don't I just throw a Kinks song in? So yeah, there is a Kinks track in. It's a pretty obvious one though, if you know 80s Kinks.
Have you done a Depeche Mode song yet? Which one?
Yeah, that was track 4. It was Never Let Me Down.
Was the Ringo Starr song "Stop and Smell the Roses" by any chance?
No,
that was his 80s song.
The Ringo Starr. I mean, I can tell you what it was because we'll forget by the time it actually comes up. It was because it's really late in the list. Like, this is in the last 10. It is When Rack My Brain.
Yeah, right.
From the album Stop and Smell the Roses.
Yeah.
Right, but I it was Rack My Brain because it's a song about Ringo Starr in 1981 not having any ideas for songs.
Obviously, the best thing that Ringo Starr did in the 80s was narrating Thomas the Tank Engine. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And marry her from Bond. She was a bit of all right, that Bond
Barbara
girl.
Bach, wasn't it?
Yeah. And he also crops up in the George Harrison song I picked as well. There's a George Harrison song called When We Was Fab, reminiscing about the Beatles, and a Ringo crops up there as well. I thought he was in the Paul McCartney video, and then I realized that everybody in the Paul McCartney video is Paul McCartney, including the women. I didn't know that. When that video comes, everybody in it is Paul McCartney. So that's kind of quite amazing. I think that was because Paul's thing was he plays all the instruments himself. Wasn't that his whole Paul McCartney solo non-Wings albums? Like the USP was that he plays every instrument, I think.
Everything, the drums, the triangle.
Like Paul McCartney is a multi-talented man. He can play, so he can play every single instrument, recorder,
piccolo,
xylophone, piccolo, you name it, violin.
Glockenspiel. Yeah.
He can do the lot.
Viola.
And that was on McCartney 2, I believe. McCartney 2.
Cor Anglais.
Oh, I can do. I mean, have a look at the liner notes from McCartney albums, and you'll see the sheer amount of instruments he could play.
Timpani. Yeah.
Commodore Jensen says, anytime the left wants, we can join forces, drop the accusations, have reasonable conversations, and let's work together against the tech oligarchy. The trouble is with the left is that they're just as slot-brained as the right. So, they've been energized by Keir Starmer's speech and calling Farage racist, and like they fall for it every time as well. There needs to be a figure on the left handing out "Fell for It Again" awards on that side too. It's
like they have to fall for it again, though, isn't it? It's like it's fascist not to, it's like you're breaking from the pack if you don't fall for it again. In that case,
The only guy who didn't fall for it was Maurice Glassman.
You and your Glassman, you are actually like an acolyte of Lord Glassman now. This is one of the worst.
But unfortunately, the only good bit of Labour, Blue Labour, are very pro-Zio. Unfortunately, you can't get away from it.
And the SDP is the same, isn't it? I just want to remind you that when Curtis Yarvin, that sort of hit piece that actually made him look all right, was it the FT the other week, about 6 weeks ago? They mentioned that he had just met Lord Glassman and a group of other Jewish lords, and I was like, there is no Labour, there is no Blue Labour. There's Lord Glassman and the other lords, of his tribe, and that is really what he cares about.
Strange. Lewis Brackpool says, "Enjoying the chat, lads." Thank you very much, Lewis. Keep up the good work yourself, sir. Maximus Aquila says, as per your stream yesterday, many of us share your disdain for right-wing populism. Localism and protectionism are not right-wing. There's a reason that Moustache Man, Big Chin Man, and Big Oswald were on the left. $11 Cheese says, I recently watched Made in Britain with Tim Roth, where I learned the British equivalent of Grand Theft Auto is taking and driving away, or euphemistically, touching the dog's ass.
I've seen that film. Have you seen that? It's quite a good film.
I don't think I have, actually.
It's a very young Tim Roth. He must be a teenager, or he's very young anyway. Yeah, he's just like a tearaway who he's not scared of the police. Like they threaten him and beat him up and stuff, and he just remains a yob. It's quite good.
R. Hayes says, will this Adam Curtis review have Horace's love interest, Hillary Clinton?
I hate Hillary Clinton. You must have got mixed up. I despise her. She's horrible.
I was saying Hillary Clinton when she was young looked okay in some of the previous in high
somebody actually did a thing, didn't they? Of each of the panel had a love interest. Mine was Blair, of course, and I can't remember. Yours was Hillary. I can't remember who Nick's was.
Yeah, she looked a bit like a girl called Stephanie I knew who played the cello when I was young.
Was that a euphemism?
No, she played the cello. She was sort of blonde and gorgeous. more prettier than Hillary, actually, but just reminded me slightly in the face.
I just clicked onto Twitter for the first time. Oh, my God. We're going to have to watch this live, I'm afraid.
Oh, dear.
Ed Miliband has said something.
Oh, no.
This might be the final straw. I saw something from Miliband yesterday that made me think I'm going to have to leave the country because he's just so... But let's have a watch.
Okay. Brace.
Conference. We have a message.
Serious face.
Get the hell out of our politics and our country.
Oh. Unbelievable.
Well, that's solved that problem.
He apparently, I mean, he's quite like they're doing the Labour conference at the moment, so he's everywhere at the moment. Ed Miliband. Let me show you the other one of him.
I mean, like, there's no way Musk can stay involved in our politics after that.
Right, here's the other one from Miliband that's been doing the rounds. Right, can you see that? Point of view. You go to check whether Reform are still taking the country down and they're just being more divisive. Watch this.
Well, honestly, I was speechless when...
There he is.
No, that's not a winner. Whoever put that out, don't put that out.
We used to be a serious country.
He put it out himself. That's from the UK Labour TikTok channel, mate.
Oh, God.
Oh, dear.
Oh, it's just too much.
Because whoever Rupert Lowe's has... Sorry, go on.
Well, I said I'm going to move to Singapore and eat noodles. Bad enough, I can't.
There's probably cringeworthy things there as well. But like whoever does Rupert Lowe's Twitter is pretty good. They obviously follow more base people. But whoever does Labour's, I don't know what the fuck they're for.
You said you wanted somewhere cold. Why don't you go to Finland and move in next door to Dutton? They speak probably good English over there, and it's freezing. And
Roman Hank says, "Hello, lads. We are back. There was more Curtis in this UO stream than usual, which is cool." Dan, Qua 1111
Sorry, did they say UO stream? This is the deepest law.
Exactly.
Some people are trying to make this into a surrogate UO. This is disgraceful.
Dan Qua 111 says, "What do you mean on their side? Handing out fell for it again awards? That you, eh? Oh yeah, well, that could be me. Maybe by the time we get to 2029, I'll be fully embedded in the centre left, handing out fell for it again awards to Ash Sakar and Owen Jones."
I will just say to all the leftists who are listening, we are prepared to work with you. We do have some common enemies. You're not allowed to assault us. You know, you can still insult us. We can take that, but you're not allowed to assault us. Okay.
All right. It's hopeless. It really is. It's like I put out a tweet yesterday saying it's like everybody in our politics has Tourette's, right? But rather than swearing, one side just cannot help but just call people racist, and the other side just cannot start blurting out, you know, "I love Israel" and touching the wall. It's just like you're always caught between these two things. It's just like, come on now.
You see, when Starmer was doing his peroration, if that's what it was supposed to be, like, you notice how the crowd they wouldn't let their applause abate because it was such an important point. We must nail the racists, and they're like cheering all the way through his sentence. Do you notice that? It's like they're trying to sort of G each other up into hysteria to keep the thing going, but they know it's dying.
And it's funny looking at some of this footage. I mean, Nick Dixon and I, we're maybe doing a stream coming up on Saturday where we're just reviewing just clips that the algo pushes into our social media, just shorts. And there was one of the Blair making his last speech at conference in 2006 or 7. And the contrast between the way the Labour conference looked then with serious-looking professional politicians and even a serious-looking audience to now, where you see people in the audience kind of looking around, sort of thinking, what the hell is going on? But they're not saying anything. They're just applauding automatically. But the audience is much more raggedy these days, whereas back then you said, God, they're all sort of sharply dressed and serious looking and concentrated. And Blair makes a kind of, admittedly, he does good speech, you know.
Well, yeah, that's what you get with a good football manager stats.
Yeah. I will notice one thing in the speech, in the clip that we're looking at, he does point his finger. And I thought that's a unique Blair finger point, you know, pre-using the thumb. But he's making a point, like, that's a really kind of emotional point about we've saved kids in Africa from starving. And
I think the thing is that in Labour conference, they have to be a bit more retarded, basically, because they're talking to the left. So it's usually the case that Labour, when they have their conference, are more nutty than usual because they're talking to themselves. So they have to they're doing their equivalent. This is so bizarre. They're doing their equivalent of throwing red meat to the base, but their red meat is like calling people racist or like, you know, virtue signaling or something like that. So, yeah. All right, folks. Well, pick up a course. You can find that link. The Foundations of Shakespeare book is now on pre-sale. I don't think it's out until the winter, it says. So I'm guessing it's going to come out for Christmas. But you can pick up a pre-order now if you've actually bought Foundations of Shakespeare. You can send them a receipt as proof, and they'll halve the price for you because it's meant as a tie-in for the course as well as a nice coffee table bit. Anything you guys want to plug before we get out of here?
Just the excellent work being done on the Substack run by Horus, and I'm on Twitter at Simon__Roberts. I don't read books and I don't dream anymore.
Well, that's where you're going wrong. I also recommend Simon's Twitter because you do, as I say, you get the extra deepest lore. You get the deeper lore.
It's like the footnotes. Button. It's the footnotes to the show, basically.
Yeah. More content from this episode.
And sometimes in advance of the show, you were posting stuff about this one last night, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, the left, obviously, they can't throw out red meat. So what would the left actually throw out? Couscous?
Yeah, no, like an edamame bean shaker.
Kale, throwing out kale to the crowd.
A kale poke bowl. Right, yeah.
Quinoa, yeah.
Kale and quinoa poke bowl with a bit of sweet potato. There's your carb.
Soy, that's a perfect one. Soy packets. All right. Bye, everyone.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!
Well, that's easily fixed.